After having a good laugh with Anwar, 13 headed towards Lady Briella's personal quarters to have an important talk with her. Unlike most tigerkins, Briella had long orange hair with red stripes in it. Her gray eyes, which were extremely rare among her race, made her stand out from the rest. Her daughter, Cleo, also had unusual eye colors which were purple and green, which were also an extreme rarity among tigerkins. This made these two ladies very special in the eyes of their people. Both of them were seers, but they never saw the same vision in the same way. Briella gains her visions anytime and anywhere, but Cleo only saw them through her dreams. Since he was dealing with two seers, 13 naturally understood that they had already seen him in their visions. This was especially true for Lady Briella, who had instantly labeled him as her adoptive son, whether he liked it or not. "Lady Briella, are you in?" 13 asked after knocking on the door of her room twice. "Come in, Zion," Briella replied from the other side of the door. "I have been expecting you." After gaining permission, 13 entered the room and immediately froze after seeing the beautiful lady sharpening a sword in her hands. "Did I come at the wrong time?" 13 asked as he looked at the sharp blade that glinted in the sunlight. "You came at the perfect time, Zion." Briella smiled as she made a gesture for the boy to come closer to her. "Didn't I tell you earlier? I have been expecting you." "Ha-ha! I just remembered something just now." Lady Briella. 13 scratched his head like an innocent 7-year-old. "I forgot something in my room. I'll go get it before I come back." But just as he turned around to walk away, his head collided with something that was as soft as marshmallows. "Zion, what's the rush?" Lady Briella said as she hugged the boy in a firm hold, having no intention of letting him go. "Let's have a nice chat, shall we?" Without even waiting for his answer, Lady Briella locked the door and dragged the helpless boy towards the couch. The boy was forced to sit on her lap, leaving no room for him to move. She then held the sharp sword in her hand and lightly pressed the blade over Zion's cheek and looked at him with eyes filled with amusement. A sharp blade was pressed against his left cheek, while something soft was pressed against his right cheek. For a brief moment, Zion mused which was more dangerous, the sword on his left cheek or the soft marshmallows pressing against his right cheek. "Well then, let me guess why you are here. You come to ask me if I knew you before you arrived here, right?" 13 didn't even need to think before saying yes. He could tell that the time for jokes was over, and the tigerkin in front of him was no longer the kind lady he knew, but a mother who was currently grieving the loss of her two sons. If 13 played around when Lady Briella was in this state, he knew that his chances of leaving the room alive were 0. "Yes," 13 replied. "Since Lady Briella has personally told me that she is a seer, I want to know everything you know about me, down to the last detail. And what if I don't tell you what I know? What will you do about it?" "I won't do anything, but I can make a guess." 13 had completely forgotten that a blade was pressed against his cheek as he held the beautiful lady's gaze fearlessly. "You could have stopped Percival from being captured by the barbarians, but you chose not to," 13 stated. Visions are not set in stone, and as someone who fully understood this, you knew the right way of altering your son's fate. But you didn't stop it. The reason? Because you knew that if Percival stayed here, you would only be holding him back from his potential. You understood that even though he is going to be a slave and face hardships, it was ultimately for the greater good, was it not? Lady Briella didn't deny or affirm Zion's words and only smiled faintly. "You already knew, right?" 13 pressed further. "That your son was going to become my slave, and that is how you knew of my existence. In the end, the real reason why Percival was captured by the barbarians wasn't because of Anwar's plan, but because you chose to let it happen, right?" Among 13's hosts, 3 of them had been seers, and 1 of them had been an oracle. He knew perfectly well how their powers worked. So he understood that if an experienced seer like Briella wanted to stop Percival from being captured by the enemy, she could have easily stopped it, even if she had to pay a price for it. But she didn't do anything and let the events unfold normally. "Say, Zion, just who are you?" Briella said as her gray eyes glowed briefly with power. "Just what kind of existence is trapped inside this child's body? What is your goal? What is it that you want? What will it take for you to return my son?" 13 remained silent, as he continued to stare at the beautiful lady, who could easily cut his head off in a heartbeat. My goal, 13 smiled faintly, is to return home to my family. Anything else? I also plan to kill some monarchs in the future. After that, beat the crap out of a god. After that, I never really thought about anything past that. Briella removed the blade from 13's face before tidying his clothes, as if nothing had happened, and made him sit properly on the couch. Zion, something or someone is blocking my visions, Briella stated. Something very powerful is coming, and I'm afraid that whatever it is, it will not only spell doom for our race, but every race within the Valbera archipelago. The last vision I saw was of you being carried to our residence, and I had a feeling that it will also be the last vision that I will be having for a time. Freewebble.com. My daughter keeps having a recurring dream about you standing on a hill overlooking a battlefield, with meteors falling down from the sky, killing both barbarians and tigerkins alike. She has been having the same dream over and over again, so it is already etched in her soul like a curse. Unlike me, my daughter's visions are true visions that will come to pass no matter what. This is also why we never see the same vision at the same time, because the visions I see can be changed, while hers were set in stone. 13 listened closely, as Briella told him what Cleo had seen, down to the last detail. But, even after hearing everything, 13 asked for Briella to bring Cleo to him, so that he could personally ask her questions that only she, who had seen the vision, could answer. Several minutes later, the young lady appeared inside her mother's room. The first thing that happened was that her body shuddered uncontrollably the moment her gaze landed on the human boy, who was sitting on the couch, waiting for her arrival. It took Briella a few minutes to calm her daughter down by hugging her tightly and assuring her that everything was going to be fine. After regaining her calm, 13 asked her several questions that even Briella found very surprising. She already thought that she had explained her daughter's vision down to the last detail. But, after Zion's inquiry, she realized that she had missed out on minute details that didn't seem important at first. But after these small details were butted up against each other, she couldn't help but shudder after realizing what was about to unfold. The 7-year-old's face became solemn after connecting the dots together. He knew that a third party was involved, but he didn't expect that a nefarious being had actually set his sights on the Valbera archipelago. A being that would make the diabolical hyena, as well as the purple-furred honey badger, look harmless in comparison. Should I consider leaving this place and go to the mainland as fast as possible? This thought crossed 13's mind, but after thinking about it carefully, he believed that Christopher's and the other Wanderers' missions were tied up in this event. If he left with Christopher, Rihanna, and the others, none of them would be able to complete this mission, and all of them would be trapped in the world of Solterra for the rest of their lives. But this ending was something that 13 didn't want to happen. Now I understand, 13 thought. The Wanderers didn't have to fight the war. They only need to light the beacon of hope. Things were becoming clear to him, and with this realization, he also understood that whatever the outcome of this war would be after the Wanderers returned to Pangea, the loss of countless lives was already set in stone. And if the worst-case scenario happened, 13 would be among those who might perish, for unlike the Wanderers, he had to survive the aftermath after the beacon of hope was lit. Damn you, old man. 13 cursed the system god in his heart. You really thought things through, but you made one big mistake. You gave me time. Yes, Tom was on his side. Challenge accepted, old man. 13 gave the system god the middle finger in his heart. You're going down. After he met with the two seers, the 7-year-old locked himself up inside his room as he organized his thoughts. The deadline is when a full war breaks out between the Tigerkin and the barbarians, 13 mused. Before the time is up, I need to have found the ringleaders manipulating the war behind the scenes. His mind moved like clockwork, formulating countless solutions to the problems that he was facing. 13 was once a system, so this was already second nature for him. As long as he had enough information and resources, he would be able to come up with a plan to solve almost any problem and find a path, even if others thought that there was no way in sight. If only he still had his previous mental capabilities that rivaled that of a supercomputer, then it would have only taken him a few seconds to formulate a foolproof plan. But since he was in a human's body, and he didn't want to strain his mental capacities, he decided to take his time generating the plan he needed. After nearly 2 hours of careful thinking, the young man sighed in relief before opening his eyes. This will work. 13 smiled faintly. Now I just need to 13 blinked, once then twice as he looked at the 2 Pocopocos that were perched on top of the table, looking back at him with dumb looks on their faces. Did I strain my brain too? 13 rhetorically muttered to himself as he placed his hand on his forehead. I'm starting to see things in twos. No, master. You're not seeing things in twos, Visego replied in an amused tone. I see. Then who is this? 13 eyed the Pocopoco standing beside Visego with great interest. Well, she doesn't have a name yet. She, 13 eyed the Pocopoco, who looked exactly like Visego. Well, most Pocopocos looked similar to each other, so it was very hard to tell which was which. But the 7-year-old didn't expect to find another Pocopoco in the Valbera archipelago, since their habitat was only on the main continent of Solterra. Let me tell you a bit about her, Visego replied. Judging by her story, she is one of our kind who likes to do things differently. While we spend most of our lives in the main continent, there are a handful who wish to see what lay beyond the sea, and she is one of them. 13 nodded in understanding. So why is she here? Does she plan to also work for me, or something? No, Visego replied. At least not yet. She's quite interested in the person who knew how to form a bond with our kind. She decided to come with me to observe what kind of orders I am taking from you. I see. 13 gave the other Pocopoco a second glance before coming up with an idea. For now, I'll give you a nickname because it will be awkward to keep referring to you as you. Keep in mind that this isn't a permanent name, but just a nickname. I know that you Pocopocos change your names often, so this shouldn't be a big deal to you. The unnamed Pocopoco continued to stare at the boy with a dumb look on her face, which made 13 smirk. Poca, 13 said. Your nickname will be Poca for now. The Pocopoco didn't reply, but she still nodded her head in acknowledgement of 13's words. Good timing, Visego. There is something that I want you to do, 13 said. But I need to see Lady Briella again, so that she can help me talk with General Stark. Stay here for the time being. After giving his orders, 13 took 4 wooden bowls and filled 2 of them with water. He then filled the 2 remaining bowls with nuts before leaving the room. He didn't know if Poca was interested in working with him, but either way, he didn't plan on actively recruiting her. Visego was enough for the things he needed to do, so he wouldn't be disappointed if Poca left after a few days of tagging along with Visego. When he arrived in Briella's quarters, he told her what he had in mind and asked if she could help him talk to General Stark about it. Since they were already on the same side, Briella agreed and led the boy to her husband's office. Fortunately, the general was alone when he arrived, allowing 13 to get down to business. I need your help, General, 13 stated. It's a matter of utmost importance for the survival of the Tigerkins. General Stark frowned, but after seeing his wife's solemn expression, he decided to listen to what Zion had to say. What can I help you with? General Stark asked. Does this something have to do with Anwer? No. 13 shook his head. I just need answers. Can you tell me who among the Tigerkins are advocating for the war to push through? Lady Briella mentioned earlier that there are 2 factions within the Sumatran nobility. The first is the conservative faction where you belong, who advocate seeking a peaceful relationship with the barbarians. 13 raised his index finger. The second one is the radical faction who is pushing for Tigerkin supremacy, forcing young warriors to take up arms to make the entirety of the Valbera archipelago fall under the Tigerkin's rule. General Stark once again glanced at his wife before pulling out one of the drawers on his desk. He then took out a scroll and handed it to Zion. Listed there are all the members of the radical faction, General Stark explained. This includes their respective positions in their party. But why do you need this? I will let Lady Briella explain everything to you, General, 13 answered. Just know that from this moment onwards, I will not do anything to harm your family's interest. My goal is to change the direction of this war. Change the direction of this war? What are you talking about? Just ask Lady Briella for answers, General. You will believe her more than you will believe me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be taking my leave. 13 gave the general a brief bow before leaving the room. In his discussion with Lady Briella, he already asked her to divulge everything that they had talked about to the general so that he was more likely to cooperate with him in the future. After returning to his room, the boy studied the scroll that was given to him and was surprised to see how detailed it was. Not only did it have the names of the people from the radical faction, but it also had the location of their homes, making it easier for 13 to start his investigation. Vasego, you have work to do, 13 said as he showed the the scroll in his hand. You're to visit these people one by one and investigate a few things about them. This is what I want you to do. 13 carefully explained the things that Vasego needed to do when visiting the people on the list. Poca, who was also standing beside Vasego, also scrutinized the scroll that was lying on top of the table. The Poco race was very good when it came to memorizing things. This was why they were able to imitate any sounds or voices as long as they heard it once. After understanding the contents of his mission, Vasego took flight to the sky, heading to the places that were listed on the scroll. Poca flew beside him because she was quite curious about this mission as well. That's one problem down, 13 thought. Now, I need to visit Rafiki and stock up on those truth serums. 13 knew that in order to gather enough information, he needed to make some people talk. What better way to do it than to make use of Rafiki's truth serum, which had received a passing grade from 13. Just a day ago, he planned to leave the Sumatran kingdom as early as possible before the war started. But now, he decided to stay for a period of time to make sure that the war would be delayed for as long as possible, giving him the time he needed to put his plan into motion. While this was happening, Anwar, who was still locked up inside the prison, finally made up his mind. If there was really a way to redeem himself, then he would give it a try so that he would get a second chance to make peace with the family, who still hadn't completely broken their ties with him. Somewhere inside a secluded forest in the Sumatran kingdom. How are the plans for the war coming along? A tigerkin with black stripes in his hair asked. Will we be able to mobilize in a month? At the earliest, yes, an old tigerkin wearing glasses replied. But according to my informant in the palace, the conservative faction is trying to convince the king that launching a war against the barbarians will just cause hardships for the people. Fortunately, our faction has more members than them, Lord Brigham. Because of this, the pleas of the conservative faction will not change anything. At most, they can delay the war for 2 to 3 months. But this war will push through no matter what. Brigham shook his head firmly. The war must not be delayed. If we can't move out in a month, we should move out after 2 months. Tell everyone in the capital to push for this proposal. Make sure to start the war propaganda as well. We must make the people understand that conquering the entirety of the entire Valbera archipelago will benefit the Tigerkins, as well as promote a peace that will last for hundreds of years. Then, what about the generals? A Tigerkin whose hair was nearly silver asked. More than half of them are from the Conservative Party. Even if the nobles vote for the war to push through, it is the generals who march with the army to battle. Negotiate with them, Brigham stated. Bribe them if you must. The armies must march in 2 months at the latest. Who is the general that is being vocal about this war being a bad move for the kingdom? General Stark, the old tigerkin wearing glasses, answered in a heartbeat. Since his wife is a seer, his words are not something that the king can ignore. Brigham clicked his tongue after hearing his subordinate's report. That general has always been an annoyance to our faction. Can you people not kidnap his wife or something? If not his wife, then his kids. As long as we have them, he will be easier to convince. The 6 tigerkins, who were in the clearing, glanced at each other before shifting their gaze back to Brigham. That will be a bit difficult to do, the tigerkin with silver hair said. Since his youngest son, Percival, has disappeared, the security in Karabayr city has become stricter. Anyone visiting from the other cities must first get permission from the general himself before they can enter the city. Bribing the guards will also not work, since all of them sympathize with the loss of the general's son. It will be hard to bring our people inside the city. Then how about assassins? Brigham asked. Although their specialty lies in killing people, I'm sure they will be able to at least capture a member of their family, right? If not the wife, then get his daughter. As long as we get one of them, he will have no choice but to yield. The old tigerkin, wearing glasses, nodded his head. Understood, Lord Brigham. I will handle the negotiations. Brigham nodded. For now, prioritize speeding up the war preparations. No matter what happens, we must bring the barbarians to their knees. Yes, Lord Brigham. After the meeting ended, the 6 tigerkins silently returned to their respective domains. They would often meet in this clearing in a secluded area of the Sumatran kingdom because they didn't want other people to know that they were meeting each other. On the surface, all of them were political enemies. But this was only a ruse that they had made in order to have spies planted in the different factions of the Sumatran kingdom. In short, they were the masterminds who were pushing for the war to happen as soon as possible from the shadows, instigating the common people, the nobles, as well as the military officers of the kingdom to rise up in arms to fight against the barbarians. Before Brigham left the clearing, he noticed 2 birds that he hadn't seen before perched on top of one of the trees in the distance. The 2 birds were quite ugly, so he didn't pay much attention to them. This wasn't the first time that wild animals and monsters had appeared at their meeting place, so the thought of them being spies never crossed his mind. Once the 2 Pocopocos were certain that all the tigerkins had left the forest, the 2 of them flew away to share the news with a certain 7-year-old who was currently busy making dozens of truth serums alongside the shaman Rafiki. 2 days later, General Stark, who had been told about his wife's and her daughter's vision, was currently inside his office alongside Briella and Zion. The 3 of them were making plans for how to delay the war as long as possible and ensure that they would be able to identify the real reason why this war was being pushed through by the radical faction. 13 had proposed many plans, which made General Stark start to treat him more seriously due to how decisive he was. There was even a plan to kidnap the king of the Sumatran kingdom, which General Stark vehemently rejected. He would never commit treason against his own liege, causing the 7-year-old to smile and tell him that he was just joking. However, General Stark knew that the boy wasn't joking, due to how serious his eyes were when he presented this idea. While the 3 of them were discussing, Visago and Poca flew through the window and landed on top of the table, where a map of the Sumatran kingdom was laid out. Welcome back, Visago. 13 greeted the Poco, who had been away for nearly a week after the boy had given him a mission. How was your scouting mission? Fruitful, Visago answered. Tell us what you discovered during your scouting mission. 13 ordered. The Poco then began his report, even repeating the exact words that he had heard from the people that 13 had asked him to pay special attention to. When Visago arrived at the part when Brigham had ordered assassins to kidnap Briella or Cleo, the general's face contorted with rage, but he managed to hold himself back from breaking the table due to his anger. That sly fox, General Stark growled. So he is the one pushing for this war from the shadows. He hid himself well. Brigham wasn't the leader of the radical faction. In fact, his position in the faction wasn't really that high in the pecking order. But 13 told Visago to pay more attention to him because he was the most suspicious among the bunch. He knew for a fact that smart people always like to keep a low profile, which was especially true for villains. They would only move in the shadows, hiding in plain sight, and were more than happy to let other people take the spotlight. These were truly dangerous people. If not for the fact that 13 knew how villains operated, he wouldn't have known which one on the list that General Stark had given him was the one with the highest chance of being the puppet master behind the scenes. And fortunately, his gamble paid off, greatly shortening the time they needed to take to narrow down the suspect that he had marked inside his head. Should I move to kill Brigham? General Stark, who had no intention of endangering his family, asked his wife for advice. Briella, who had been asked this question, shifted her attention to the 7-year-old, who was looking at the map of the Sumatran kingdom. Zion, what do you think we should do? Briella inquired. If we eliminate Brigham, the war will stop, right? The boy shook his head as he continued to scrutinize the map that was laid out on the table. My goal has never been to stop the war preparations, Lady Briella, 13 replied without taking his eyes on the map of the Sumatran kingdom. I already told you that my purpose is to change the direction of the war. In short, the Tigerkins must be ready to wage war, but the enemy will not be the barbarians. If not the barbarians, then who? General Stark asked. I can't tell you right now, 13 answered, because if I did, you would definitely consider leaving the Valbera kingdom with your family. I will need your help if we are to give the Sumatran kingdom a fighting chance against our true enemies. General Stark, who wasn't satisfied with Zion's answer, was about to press him to tell him the truth, but his wife, Briella, held his arm and shook her head. Just trust him for now, Briella said softly. That is what my vision is telling me. For the first time, Briella lied to her husband. She really hadn't seen any other visions aside from 13 coming to their residence. However, she was willing to lie in order to make her husband cooperate with the boy, whom she believed was sent to the Valbera archipelago for a reason. Fine, then tell me, what should I do? General Stark stared at the human boy, whom his wife trusted very much. Am I supposed to just sit here and wait for those assassins to come knocking on my door? Of course not, 13 replied. We're going to strike, and strike hard, deep behind enemy lines, in order to make them bleed. And for this to work, I will need your most loyal subordinates who are willing to die for your sake. The missions that they will conduct are downright treasonous, so if they are more loyal to the king than you, this plan will not work. The more General Stark listened to the boy, the more he felt that Zion was a very dangerous person, which made him wonder what the boy had experienced to become this evil at such a very young age. Just tell me one thing, General Stark said with all the seriousness he could muster. Are you doing this for the Tigerkin race as a whole, or are you just weakening the Sumatran kingdom to allow the barbarians to trample over us? 13, whose gaze was on the map of the Sumatran kingdom all this time, raised his head and met the general's gaze without flinching. Although it is hard to believe, I'm doing this to give your race a higher chance of survival, 13 answered. Not only the Tigerkins, but I plan to do this with the barbarian race as well. After I'm done with the Sumatran kingdom, I will return to the barbarian lands and find the ringleaders on their side as well. What you don't know, General, is that this entire thing is actually a big conspiracy. Brigham and some of the nobles of the Sumatran kingdom have sold your people to someone else. The same can be said for the barbarians. The point of this whole war is to simply weaken both sides. Tell me, General, who will benefit most if the Tigerkins and the barbarians have an all-out war with each other? Who will benefit most if the powerhouses of the Valbera archipelago were to die one after the other? General Stark pondered for a bit, but he couldn't think of anyone who would benefit from this war. However, his line of thinking changed the moment he excluded the people that lived in the Valbera archipelago. Don't tell me, the mainland? General Stark looked at Zion in disbelief. 13 nodded his head in confirmation. That's right. The true enemy will come from the mainland, and they will arrive shortly after the war starts. I will not go into detail, because they are not important right now. I see. So that's it. General Stark finally understood why the human boy said that he only planned to change the direction of the war. He didn't plan to stop the war preparation completely. No, he needed the Tigerkins to be ready for war, but not against the barbarians but the true enemies that would arrive from the mainland. 13 knew that he needed to share a bit of information to the general to make him stop doubting his every decision and his every move. If he wanted to get General Stark's full cooperation, he must make him understand that there was a greater threat outside the scope of his vision. How about I share this information with the king? General Stark asked. If I do, I'm sure he will at least hear me out. Useless. 13 shook his head before returning his attention on the map. Your king won't believe you because you have no proof. Also, the masterminds behind the radical faction will no longer spare any effort to eliminate you and your family. They will recognize you as a thorn that must be removed no matter what. When that happens, you will be a fugitive in your own kingdom. So, General, just close your eyes and let me and Amwer handle the dirty work for you. All you need to do is remain the general who will protect his people. Keep your image clean, so when you actually speak, people will listen to you. Also, Make sure to give me a small team that is loyal to you and only you. Make sure that there is at least one champion in the group. This mission is very dangerous, so I will need someone who will be able to cover our tracks when things get messy." General Stark nodded and promised that he would give 13 the manpower he needed. This made 13 very happy, because he would use the people that the general would give him to not only throw a wrench on their enemies' plans, but also profit from the experience as well. "I guess it's time for me to change profession to that of a bandit lord," 13 mused. Time to loot some people. What 13 lacked in the Sumatran kingdom was manpower and resources. Since the general would give him manpower, then he would just steal the resources from others. After all, since the ones he was stealing from were his enemies, he would not hesitate to steal everything from them. This would not only help delay the war, but it would also make the other nobles, who were part of the radical faction, become more wary, thinking that they were making enemies the more they pushed for their warriors to start marching on the battlefield. 13 and his previous hosts specialized in stealing stuff from prominent families, as well as raiding the treasuries of a kingdom. Now that he could justify this hobby of his, he would not hesitate to fill his own coffers with the wealth of his foes, who had no idea that their nefarious schemes were already discovered by the General Stark's family. Anwar, who was still inside the underground prison, raised his head upon hearing the footsteps drawing nearer in his direction. "He's back again," Anwar thought. "He really is persistent." Whenever Zion visited him, the human boy would talk about random things. He never mentioned anything about Anwar becoming his slave or freeing him from the prison. The boy didn't try to entice him with other proposals and simply kept him company for an hour before leaving again. He was also the one who brought Anwar's food on a daily basis, not allowing anyone to come near the prison aside from him. In time, Anwar started to look forward to his company because he was the only one he could talk to. Whenever the 7-year-old wasn't around, Anwar would be surrounded by nothing but darkness. There was no light source in the prison, and only when 13 visited would he see a torchlight that illuminated his surroundings. Although Tigerkins had dark vision, the prison still felt dark and lonely without anyone around. As usual, Zion entered the prison while pushing a cart of food and holding a torchlight in his free hand. After placing the food near his cell, the 7-year-old sat casually on top of the cart with his chin resting on the palm of his hands. Since his hands were no longer shackled, Anwar didn't hesitate to grab the food in front of his cell and started to eat. Usually, 13 would already start talking at this point, but this time, he just remained quiet, which unnerved Anwar. It was like he was having his last supper, and when morning came, he would finally be executed for the crimes that he had committed. Unable to tolerate the deafening silence anymore, Anwar raised his head and looked at the boy, who was just watching him eat in silence. "What's wrong?" Anwar asked. "Am I going to be executed?" "No," 13 replied. "Then why are you so silent?" "I'm looking at you as much as I can because tomorrow I will no longer be the one bringing you your food. I have an important mission to do for your father. You see, someone is planning to send assassins to either kidnap or kill Lady Briella and Cleo, so I need to put a stop to their plans." Anwar, who was about to take a bite of the bread in his hands, froze after hearing that his adoptive mother and the girl he loved were being targeted by someone. "Who dares?" Anwar roared. "Are they mad? They are planning to kidnap or kill the wife and daughter of a general." 13 nodded. They are indeed mad. But this is nothing new. It's just politics. Even princes fight and kill each other to become the next king. In comparison, the family of a general being targeted because he is part of a different faction is a very normal thing. Anwar, who thought that the boy was just joking, suddenly felt cold inside. He knew that the friction between the radical and conservative faction was getting intense as of late, but he never thought that things would escalate this far. "Ooh," Anwar asked coldly. "What will you do with that information?" 13 asked in a teasing tone. "What can you do while being locked up inside that cell?" "Just continue to eat, so I can leave and meet the team of people who will accompany me to kill the fools who are targeting your mother and sister." Anwar looked at the bread in his hand before crushing it to pieces. How could he possibly eat knowing that his mother and sister were being targeted by assassins? "Hey, if I become your slave, will you take me with you?" Anwar asked. "Take you with me?" 13 chuckled. "Why would I do that? It will be best if you just go to the barbarian lands and reunite with your little brother, Percival. You can take me there too, but only after I have personally killed the people who are targeting my family." "Oh." 13 smirked after seeing the determination in Anwar's gaze. He could genuinely tell that the Tigerkin was serious about becoming his slave in exchange for allowing him to personally kill the people that wanted to harm his family. "Anwar, what I'm going to do isn't child's play," 13 explained. "This isn't a game where you can join and quit anytime you want. What I'm going to do is shake up the entirety of the Sumatran kingdom and conduct things that could have you executed for treason. In short, in order to protect your family, you will have to do the dirty work and become a villain. While your family will stay in the light and keep their good reputation, you will be covered in the blood of their enemies in the darkness, never to gain recognition for your sacrifices." "I don't care," Anwar growled. "If this is the only way that I can redeem myself, I don't mind killing everyone who wishes to harm my family. As long as you can promise me that this is for the Evander family, I don't care if I do all the dirty work myself." 13 didn't say anything and just stared at the Tigerkin, whose eyes were glowing golden in the darkness. If he were Anwar's system, he would have heard a ringing sound at this point in time, notifying the Tigerkin that he had unlocked a mission or gained a new title that would set him on the path of becoming a first-rate villain. An existence that could only be defeated by their fated heroes, whom fate had prepared for them. But there was one problem. The hero that was supposed to defeat Anwar had become 13's slave and was being played with on the palm of his hand. In other words, as long as 13 put in a lot of effort, he was confident that he could make the two brothers reconcile, which would make Anwar unstoppable. And, right now, he needed the power of a hero and a villain in order to beat the third party, who planned to flip their game of chess upside down. After a few minutes, 13 hopped off the cart and walked away from Anwar's jail cell, leaving the Tigerkin behind. Anwar thought that the human boy had rejected his request, which made him clench his fists tightly, drawing blood from his palms. Suddenly, he heard the sound of something metallic falling in the cell in front of him. "Come out when you're ready." 13's voice echoed inside the prison. "We have some assassins to catch." Anwar didn't hesitate to grab the key on the ground and unlocked the shackles that bound his feet. He then opened the lock of his cell and walked towards the exit. The moment he opened the door, he was momentarily blinded by the sunlight that he hadn't seen for a long time. After his eyes adjusted to the brightness, his gaze then landed on Zion, who had his arms crossed over his chest. Right behind the boy were Dixon, Armand, Thane, and Alina, whom General Stark had chosen to become the 7-year. "Old manpower. Welcome, my villain," 13 said with a devilish smile on his face. "Are you ready to embark on a journey filled with blood and betrayal?" Anwar snorted before he took a step forward to walk in Zion's direction. "I already betrayed my family once," Anwar replied. "Now I want blood. Make sure to keep your promise." But of course, 13 nodded. "I will give you the blood of your family's enemies, and I guarantee that after this journey of yours ends, you will have redeemed yourself and be recognized as a hero of your people." The 7-year-old then took a dagger from his dimensional storage and used it to cut his palm, drawing blood. He then extended his bloodied hand for a handshake, surprising Anwar and the rest of the Tigerkins behind him. Anwar looked at Zion's hand for a few seconds before extending his own hand to shake it. Among the Tigerkins, the blood oath ritual was the sign of brotherhood. For webnovel.com. There were other ways to do it, but 13 chose the simplest and most appropriate method to convince Anwar that, from this moment onwards, the two of them were on the same side. The Tigerkin raised his right hand, which was still bleeding due to him clenching his fist hard enough to draw blood after he thought that Zion would leave him behind. With their blood mingling together in a handshake, the two made an oath to become sworn brothers, who would never betray each other. General Stark, Briella, and Cleo watched them from a distance, feeling complicated about how this even turned out to be. However, Zion had promised them that he would make Anwar atone for his crime and gain their forgiveness, allowing him to redeem himself. Anwar hoped with every fiber of his being that after his journey was over, he would truly get a second chance to become part of the Evander family and regain the happiness that he would work hard, once more, to achieve. This was his path to redemption, and he would not allow anyone, not even the world, to get in his way. For days after Zion freed Anwer from his prison cell, a tigerkin who seemed to be in his early 40s entered the city of Karabayr and introduced himself at the gate as a merchant. Freednoel.com. He was not alone and was accompanied by 2 other people who were both working for him. The guards usually prevented strangers from coming inside the city due to what happened to the general's son, but the merchant showed them a recommendation letter issued by one of the council members of the Sumatran kingdom. The letter meant that the tigerkin named Amory was a very trustworthy person who had gained the acknowledgement of a high-ranking noble. As such, he and his subordinates were allowed entry, on the condition that he would conduct his business properly, as was expected of a merchant. "Thank you, kind sirs," Amory thanked with a smile after he was granted access to enter the city. "I know that this is but a simple gift, but I do hope that you will accept it." The merchant then gave the 2 guards manning the gate a bottle of liquor each, which made them both smile. "Go, and make sure to not cause trouble," one of the guards stated after accepting Amory's gift. "If you have not secured your accommodation, I recommend going to the Blue Ball Inn. It's one of the best inns in Karabayr City." "Thank you for the recommendation." Amory bowed. "We'll go there and see if they have any rooms available." "Good. Enjoy your stay." "I'm sure we will." After successfully entering the city, Amory and his 2 assistants headed towards one of the inns in the city that was closest to the general's residence. "How many rooms?" the innkeeper asked after the 3 people entered his establishment. "Just one," Amory replied. "Give me your biggest and best room." The innkeeper nodded before calling out one of the inn's helpers to his side. "Zion, we have customers," the innkeeper shouted. "Get your lazy bum out here right now." Half a minute later, a 7-year-old boy appeared with an apologetic look on his face. "I'm here, boss," Zion replied. "What's up?" "Don't what's up me," the innkeeper snorted before handing the boy a key. "Escort these people to their accommodation, now." Seeing the number on the key, the boy nodded and bowed his head respectfully to their guests. "Please follow me, sir," Zion said politely. "I will take the 3 of you to your room." "Good." Amory nodded and followed the young boy headed to the stairs. After a few minutes of walking, they stopped in front of the door with a number 13 on it. "Here is your room, sirs." Zion bowed. "Room number 13. Please don't hesitate to call me or my boss if you need anything else. Here is your key. Please keep it safe because you will have to pay a fine if you lose it." "Understood. Can I order some food?" Amory asked. "I want enough for 3 people. Also, this is for you." The merchant gave the boy a silver coin, making the boy's eyes widen. "Right away, sir," Zion replied as he happily accepted the coin. "Please enjoy your stay." The boy hurriedly pocketed the silver coin as if he were afraid that his boss might confiscate it if it was discovered. Seeing the boy's antics, Amory couldn't help but smile because he had a soft spot for children. But the smile on his face disappeared as soon as he and his 2 assistants entered the room and locked the door behind them. "First, we will do some reconnaissance," Amory stated. "We will observe the layout of the general's residence from a distance and look for all possible escape routes. This is not the first time we are going after a high-profile target, so I don't want any mishaps. Do I make myself clear?" The 2 assistants beside him nodded their heads in understanding. Amory's rank was a champion, and the 2 men beside him were at the peak of the Grandmaster rank, making them pseudo-champions. "Here is the map of the residence," Amory said as he took out a scroll from his storage ring and placed it on the table in front of them. "Our targets are the general's wife and daughter. Our mission is to capture one of them. However, if capturing both is possible, then we will do that. I'm sure our rewards will be doubled or even tripled if we succeed in our mission." The 2 assassins nodded in understanding. According to their investigation, the general's wife was at the Grandmaster level, while their daughter was only at the Adept rank. The wisest choice was to capture the daughter first, since she would offer the least effective resistance against them. After finalizing the things they needed to prepare, they decided to rest a bit while waiting for their food to arrive. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait long, because a few minutes later, a knock was heard on their door. Amory personally opened it and saw Zion and the innkeeper holding trays with the food they had ordered. The merchant helped them bring the food to the table and thanked them for their services. If the food is not enough, feel free to ask for a second helping downstairs, the innkeeper smiled. Please, enjoy your stay. Enjoy your stay, misters. Zion bowed his head before following the innkeeper to leave the room. One of the assassins firmly locked the door before going to the table to eat. Finally, real home-cooked food, the assassin said after looking at the food on the table. I've grown tired of eating only dried meat during our journey. Amory nodded his head in agreement. None of them knew how to cook, and the most they could do was grill and roast things that they had caught on their journey. Since they were in a hurry, they couldn't spare time to catch anything along the way and had to make do with their rations of dried meat. Test the food first to make sure it's not spiked, Amory ordered. You think too much, Amory, one of the assassins replied, but still did as he was ordered. After doing a few tests to make sure that the food didn't contain poison, the three finally ate together. The food was cooked well, and Amory even found himself enjoying his meal to the point that after eating, he found himself feeling drowsy. However, the moment he thought of this, he immediately felt alarmed because this was a sure sign that their food had been tampered with. But how? Amory thought as he did his best to stay conscious for as long as possible. A moment later, the sound of the door being unlocked reached his ears, forcing him to look in the direction of the door. There, he saw a 7-year-old boy who had a devilish smile on his face walk into their room as if he owned the place. My dear customers, was the food to your liking? Zion asked as he walked steadily toward their guests. Behind him, Dixon, Armand, Thane, and Alina entered the room together and looked at them with calm expressions on their faces. How? Amory forced himself to ask the question that was on his mind. They made sure to check if their food was poisoned or not. Yet even after doing some tests, they didn't find anything suspicious about it. Ow! Zion smirked before placing a finger in front of his lips. Sorry, it's a trade secret. Amory, who could no longer keep himself awake, collapsed on the floor, feeling aggrieved by what just happened. They had just arrived in the city and hadn't even started their mission. And yet, they had already been captured after securing a base of operation. Dixon and his team immediately stripped the 3 unconscious Tigerkins naked, making sure that all of their tools were confiscated, as well as any possible methods they could use to escape. 13 even asked Dixon to forcefully open their mouths and check their teeth to see if they were hiding any chemicals that they could use to commit suicide. Seeing that all of them were clean, he ordered for the 3 to be taken to the prison inside the general's residence, where they would be interrogated by the general and Rafiki, who had already been informed that the assassins had been apprehended successfully. Contrary to what Amory thought, it was very easy to find out that they were the assassins that were sent by the radical faction to kidnap Lady Briella and her daughter, Cleo. Cultivation City was currently on heightened alert, so the coming and going of people was being strictly monitored. This news had also spread in the other cities, and the only ones who could enter and leave the city without any problems were the local people who lived in it. Outsiders would need the general's permission to enter, so it was difficult for those who weren't residents of Cultivation City to come and go as they pleased. 13 knew that if the assassins failed to enter the city using normal means, they would resort to other methods like climbing up the city walls in order to enter illegally. If that were to happen, it would be much harder to catch them. Having taken this into consideration, he devised a plan and had some people loyal to the general act as the city guards manning the gate. If someone were to try getting into the city using recommendations from high-ranking officials or something similar, they would immediately be introduced to the Blue Ball Inn, where 13 was waiting for them. The people who were originally working there, and even some of the guests, were replaced by General Stark's people, who would immediately step in to help if things got out of hand. 13 had personally concocted a poison that was undetectable using the methods available in the Valbera archipelago. The poison wasn't lethal. All it could do was make whoever ingested it drowsy and weaken their resistance for half a day. Once the poison was out of their system, the pitiful souls would regain their bodily functions and would not suffer from any side effects. Still, I didn't expect them to send 2 different groups of assassins, 13 said as he watched the 3 unconscious people being carried out of the room. It seems that Lord Brigham is not taking any chances. Do you think it will be more, Zion? Dixon asked solemnly. I don't know, 13 replied. But if someone uses the same method, you already know what to do. Dixon nodded. Understood. Will you be returning to the residence now? 13 hummed. How can I possibly miss having more subordinates? Dixon watched the 7-year-old walk away with a conflicted look on his face. He almost felt sorry for the assassins because by the time the day was over, they would be serving a new master who would make them work hard like slaves. Half an hour later, Amory had a blank look on his face as he stared at the space in front of him. He had just drank Rafiki's truth serum, so his thoughts were in a haze. The leader of the assassins was unable to muster any kind of resistance and told the general everything he knew. This included the names of the people whom he had assassinated in the past. After the interrogation was over, the general glanced in Zion's direction, making the latter nod his head in understanding. Well then, Sir Norris, it's your time to shine again. 13 turned around to look at the slave master behind him, whom he had tempted with a business opportunity that he couldn't reject. Leave it to me, Zion, Norris said as he started to inscribe the slave tattoo on Amory's forehead, turning him into a slave. The general looked at the slave master in distaste because he never thought that he would be working with someone who had enslaved his people and sold them as slaves to the barbarians. Slavery was not allowed within the Sumatran kingdom, but that didn't mean that there were no nobles who had done something similar to it. Their version was called debt slaves, and unless the slaves had paid their dues, they would continue to serve their masters. The only difference was that they didn't bear any slave tattoos on their bodies and did what they were asked because they had no choice but to do it. Being exiled from the Sumatran kingdom was equivalent to dying in the barbarian lands, or worse, becoming their slaves. For this reason, they willingly chose servitude in order to repay the debts they owed to their debtors. Beads of sweat formed in Norris' head because enslaving a champion wasn't an easy task at all. Norris was only a grandmaster, and truth be told, it would originally be extremely hard for him to subjugate a beastkin that was a rank higher than him with his slave magic. Fortunately, Amory couldn't muster any kind of resistance due to Rafiki's truth serum, rendering him vulnerable to mental attacks. When the beast slave tattoo was finally carved on Amory's forehead, Norris breathed a sigh of relief. The only thing left to do is to bind him to a master, Norris said, his voice filled with exhaustion. Brother, make him your subordinate. 13 glanced at Anwar, who was standing across from him. Understood. Anwar nodded and placed a drop of his blood on the tattoo on Amory's forehead, forcing him to become the villain's subordinate. It took a lot of effort to convince the general to smuggle Norris to Karabayur City to enslave the assassins who were targeting his family. The mere thought of having his people enslaved appalled him. But after 13 emphasized that it was the same people who wished to harm his family and sold their kingdom to a third party, the general hardened himself and agreed to hire the slave master to enslave the assassins that were targeting their family. Norris, who wanted nothing more than to form strong connections with the general, as well as see how Zion was doing, readily agreed to the proposal that Visego had personally delivered to Groner City. However, General Stark had a condition. Dewing readily agreed to the proposal that Visego had personally delivered to Groner City. Zion could not become the master of the assassins. The general brought this condition up because he felt that the boy might abuse the Tigerkins and order them to do evil things. In order to solve this problem, 13 proposed that all the assassins become Anwar's subordinates. Villains needed pawns, and what better pawns to have than the assassins whom their enemies had served to them on a silver platter? Since they were giving them free manpower, 13 decided to make them his sworn brother subordinates, allowing Anwar to grow his influence. General Stark still had his reservations, but the 7-year-old convinced him that Anwar wouldn't harm their family a second time. Anwar also made a blood oath to never harm the Evander family again, which made the general reluctantly agree to make the assassins his adoptive son subordinates. Although there's a chance that more assassins would come, we cannot delay our mission any further, 13 stated. We need to strike now while our enemy is still in the dark. Brother, I'll let you handle Lord Brigham. Can you do it? Anwar didn't hesitate and nodded his head. I'll handle him. Good. 13 smirked. We leave tonight and head to our designated targets. When General Stark asked Zion the method he would use in order to delay the war preparations of the Tigerkins, the boy only said one word, and that was logistics. There was a saying that warriors win battles, but logistics win wars. As long as they were able to disrupt the supply of food, weapons, as well as other miscellaneous items needed for the war, they would be able to delay the full-scale battle for a few months. Having thought of this, 13 had planned to target several places simultaneously, hitting the supply lines that belonged to the radical faction. Of course, he also asked Anwar to loot their treasuries. Their gains from this would be used to fund their future operations. The 7-year-old was making sure that his third-rate villain would grow at a rapid pace, which was why he chose to have Anwar face off against Lord Brigham. Two villains facing off against each other was a very normal thing to happen, and the boy was excited to see the result of their clash. 13 didn't know if Anwar would manage to win against his opponent. But regardless of the result, this experience would allow Anwar to realize his shortcomings, weaknesses, as well as his strengths. Of course, 13 would also help his sworn brother if he really needed it. However, until Anwar asked for his help, he would just observe from the side and let his little villain farm experience points, as well as resources. Just like the others, 13 had also chosen someone to fight against, and it was none other than the old Tigerkin, who was wearing glasses during the secret meeting with Lord Brigham. Brigham might be the puppet master behind everything, but the old Tigerkin with glasses was the one who had all the connections, including the contact to the mercenaries, as well as the assassin groups within the Sumatran kingdom. As long as 13 got his hands on the old man, he would be able to become the hidden ruler of the underworld of the Sumatran kingdom. This would allow him to move more freely within the territories of the Tigerkins, allowing him to visit the members of the radical faction one by one. 2 days after they left Carbear City, 13 and Dixon's scouting party arrived at the city of Parnia. It was a very big city, at least twice the size of Carbear City, where General Stark's family lived. This was also the territory of the old Tigerkin, Pavan Murdosk. Parnia City was the trading hub of the Sumatran kingdom. Perhaps, due to its prosperity, most businessmen and merchants wanted to set up their own stores in its busy streets. Not bad, 13 muttered as their wagon entered the city. Since the city is like this means that Pavan is rich, right? Rich, Dixon snorted. He's extremely wealthy and has connections with almost every noble family out there. Calling him rich is like saying that he is poor when he actually governs the second most prosperous city in the kingdom. Oh, my, this means that we're going to be wealthy after this operation. Am I right, Visego? They say that money can't buy you happiness, master. But you know what? It sure isn't going to make you sad. Indeed, as expected of my trusted advisor. The two evildoers then chuckled at the same time, making Polka, who was beside Visego, tilted her head in confusion. Tiona, on the other hand, felt a bit jealous of Visego because her master was paying more attention to him as of late. She also wanted to help 13 as much as possible, but the things she could do for him were very limited since she only specialized in killing people. Seeing that his beast companion was feeling left out, 13 lightly rubbed the black snake under her chin and planted a kiss on her head, making Tiona feel better. Visego, who understood Tiona's feelings, no longer talked to his master and closed his eyes to rest. Half an hour later, Dixon stopped the carriage in front of an inn located at the easternmost edge of the city. This was the ideal location for their operation because it was very near their target, which was the granary of Parnia. It was the biggest granary in the Sumatran kingdom, supplying the entire nation with food. Right next to the granary was the underground storage, where dried meat was stored in barrels filled with salt. Praven had been stockpiling these resources for the past year, in preparation for the upcoming war. Truth be told, all they were waiting for was the nod of the king, and the mobilization of the army would occur in full. But General Stark, as well as more than half of the military, didn't want this war to push through. This was also why the radical faction decided to send assassins to capture his wife and daughter. It was their hope that, by doing so, they could manipulate General Stark into supporting the war in exchange for their safety. Unfortunately for them, the assassins that they sent had been turned into Anwar's subordinates. 13's sworn brother was currently in a different city, performing a similar mission as him. Anwar had divided his forces into two teams, with Amory's group going to another city in order to set fire to the granaries located there. They knew that once a granary had been burned down, all the other cities would increase their security, preventing something similar from occurring. This was why 13 had told everyone that they would set fire to all the granaries at midnight on the 7th day, after they had left Cultivator City to head to their respective destinations. 13 also made sure to tell the assassins the truth about why they were doing this. At the end of the day, they were still Tigerkins. Because of this, he needed to tell them the importance of this mission and call them the unsung heroes of the Sumatran kingdom. Of course, the assassins still doubted his words, but in the end, he told them that they should investigate for themselves, whether he was lying or not. "I will take a stroll around the city," Dixon stated. "Since we still have 5 more days before our operation starts, I will see if I can gather some worthwhile news in the city. How about you guys?" "I'll go with you, Captain," Armand said. "I'll check the marketplace and see which big-time merchants are around," Thane commented. "I'll stay here and watch over Zion." Alina glanced at the 7-year-old, who decided to take a nap on the soft bed. Someone has to stand guard to make sure that he doesn't cause trouble. Visego and Tiona nodded their heads in agreement to Alina's words. "I'll go explore the surroundings," Visego told Polka. "Are you coming?" Polka thought for a bit before giving a low chirp of agreement. Dixon opened the window to allow the 2 birds to do what they wanted. What they didn't know was that the 7-year-old also planned to do some exploration of his own. However, he would do it under the cover of darkness. This was why he was resting now, so he would be fully awake when night came. Dun City in the Sumatran kingdom. Anwar glanced outside the window of his room and stared at the magnificent estate in the distance. Dun City was the city under the governance of Lord Brigham, whom 13 said was the mastermind behind the war propaganda of the radical faction. The younger boy stated that Anwar should never, ever try to assassinate the city lord while they were completing their mission to sabotage the radical faction's food supply. His reasoning was simple. Currently, Anwar didn't have enough manpower to take their enemy down. Right now, he only had 4 subordinates with him, which was the first group of assassins they had captured before Amory's team arrived in Cultivator City. They only had enough manpower to commit arson and not an assassination. Besides, Lord Brigham would definitely have strong guards protecting him, so killing him was an impossible task. At least for now. "Zion, you're really a capable boy, huh?" Anwar thought as he remembered the advice of his sworn brother, who had gone to Pangea City to deal with Pavan Mordosk, who was handling the bulk of the logistics of the radical faction. Anwar had hated the boy for making his life miserable. But after understanding that there was a greater threat that threatened the Sumatran kingdom and his family, Anwar decided to cooperate and recognize him as his sworn brother. Zion didn't lie to him. If they really succeeded in their missions and survived the upcoming war, then he would be hailed as a hero of the Sumatran kingdom, which was many times better than a traitor who had betrayed his own family. "Brigham," Anwar mused. "Zion called you a villain, but there can only be one villain in this kingdom. I'll kick you off of your throne soon. Until then, wash your neck." The Tigerkin's gaze hardened as he looked at the home of the person who had given the order to kidnap his mother and sister. This was a crime that went below Anwar's bottom line, and he would not rest until he personally crushed Brigham's heart and mounted his severed head on a spike, displaying it for the world to see. "Has there been any progress?" The city lord of Pangea City, Pavan, asked his butler. "News from the assassins should have reached us by now." "Nothing yet, master," the butler replied. "Maybe they're still looking for ways to infiltrate the general's residence without being seen. This is a delicate operation, so they must be taking the slow approach to have a higher chance of success." Pavan frowned, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he swirled the wine glass in his hand before giving it a casual sniff. A moment later, he drank it all before placing the wine glass on top of the table. "How about the king?" Pavan asked. Are those numbskulls in the capital really that useless? They can't even make the king agree to send a decree to mobilize the army. The butler shook his head. Master, the king has always been a pacifist, so convincing him to wage war is not going to be easy. After the losses that we suffered from the barbarians on the last expedition, he is quite hesitant to declare war. But the queen is helping us, right? Paven inquired. Her hatred for the barbarians is the real deal. This is why the king had given an order for the army to prepare for war. However, thinking back, I think this is just his way of pacifying his wife. By giving the order to prepare for war, he was able to pacify the queen and the radical faction for the time being. But unless he gives the order to march, the generals will not move. The butler nodded. Is as you say, master. However, I believe that as long as the army is ready to march any time, the possibility of the king giving in is high as well. Paven sighed before refilling his wine glass with wine. The radical faction had assigned him to handle the logistics for more than a year now, and he had to admit that the resources he currently had were more than enough to secure a victorious campaign. Paven once again picked up the wine glass and started to swirl it. However, as he was doing so, his gaze landed on a pair of ugly birds perched in the top of the tree in his garden. The two birds were busy grooming their bodies and weren't paying any attention to him. However, their ugly appearance made Paven scowl. Those two birds, are you familiar with them? Paven inquired. This is the first time I'm seeing their kind here in the Sumatran kingdom. The butler glanced in the direction of the two Pocopocos before shaking his head. No, master, the butler replied. Maybe they're just some migratory birds that came from the mainland. We do get some of those from time to time. But I have to admit, I've never seen birds that ugly. Paven clicked his tongue because he lost his interest in drinking due to the slow progress of the war, as well as the ugliness of the two birds. After drinking the wine in his cup, he stood up and entered his residence, not even glancing at the two birds, who both raised their clawed feet, giving him the middle fingers behind his back. A few hours later, Visago and Poca returned to the inn where 13's group was currently staying. The sun was just about to set, and the two wanted to have dinner with the others, who had also returned from their stroll in the city. The 7-year-old, who was still fast asleep, was gently prodded by Alina in order to wake him up. Zion, it's dinner time, Alina said. The captain has also returned, and he wants to talk to you about a few things. 13 opened his eyes and slowly propped himself up from the bed. They had rented 3 rooms, with one room belonging to Alina and 13, another room for Armand and Thane, and a room for Dixon's personal use. Everyone gathered inside Dixon's room because it was at the very end of the hallway and was much bigger than the other rooms. When 13 and Alina entered the room, they saw the 3 tigerkins seated around the table. Various dishes were served on the table, and just a glance was enough to tell them that they were all delicious. 13 sat at the head of the table, which was reserved for the leader of a group. Since he was the leader of this operation, Dixon sat on his right side, while Alina sat on his left. Armand and Thane was seated next to them. Before you start your report, let's eat first, 13 proposed. All of you have tested the food, right? Yes, Dixon replied. They are safe. 13 nodded. Tiona, check them a second time. The black snake nodded and flicked her tongue at the food on the table one by one. The Domini Mortis was the most venomous snake in Solterra, so it was very easy for her to know if something was poisoned or not. After checking all the dishes, Tiona returned to Zion and shook her head. Thank you, Tiona. 13 lightly patted the black snake's head before looking at his subordinates. Let's eat. Thank you for the food. Thank you for the food. The group ate without talking to each other. They knew that after they had sated their hunger, the time for discussion would take place, so they weren't in a hurry to divulge the information that they gathered in the city. Half an hour later, the plates had all been emptied, which was the signal for everyone to start talking. Dixon was the first one to give his report, and according to him, the granary only had 2 guards guarding it. It seemed that Paven was confident that no one in Parnia City would dare to target the granary, because it was the source of food for almost everyone in the kingdom. This included their underground storage for dried meat, which would serve as the army's primary source of meat during the long campaigns. After Dixon, Armand made his report. His report was about the barracks inside the town, and from what he had gathered, they were training fresh recruits every day. The war propaganda that they had been spreading was quite effective, painting the barbarians as savages who kept on raiding the Tigerkin villages near the borders. Thane, on the other hand, reported that almost all the wealthy merchants from well-known merchant groups had gathered in Pangea City. They were the ones that brought weapons and armor, which netted them a lot of profit for the upcoming war. Alina had nothing to report since she had been watching over 13 and making sure that he was behaving properly. Once everyone had finished talking, 13 told them to continue their exploration of the city when morning came. After that, he ended their meeting and returned to his room with Alina. 5 hours later, the 7-year-old opened his eyes and glanced at the bed beside his own bed. There, Alina was sleeping soundly, making the younger boy smile faintly. He had made Alina drink a very strong sleeping potion, which would ensure that she slept all through the night. 13 then opened the window of their room, motioning for Visego to leave the inn first. Visego nodded his head in understanding and flew outside of the window. Poca, who was curious about what they were about to do, followed Visego out of the inn. Using a grappling hook, 13 slowly descended from the window of the inn, while covered in darkness. Since they were at the easternmost part of the city, there were not many lanterns in the surroundings, making everything very dark. Of course, Tigerkins had dark vision, so this was nothing to them. After stealthily leaving the inn, 13 headed towards Pavin's residence, which was located at the base of the mountain, overlooking the city. His goal was to scout the treasury inside the residence, where Pavin kept his treasures and artifacts. He knew that if Dixon and the others knew his plans, all of them would stop him at all costs. This was why he made sure that Alina would not wake up until morning, allowing him to leave the inn undetected. Although he was just a normal 7-year-old on the surface, 13 was far from being normal. With Visego flying high in the sky and hooting from time to time to warn 13 about the guards patrolling the city, the boy was able to reach his destination in an hour. He could have arrived faster, but he didn't want to be discovered by the city guards, so he took his time to ensure that he wouldn't be caught on his late-night escapade. "Tiona, I'm leaving everything to you," 13 said. "Be careful. Visego will keep watch and alert you if there are any signs of trouble." Tiona nodded her head in understanding before crawling up the wall of the residence. She would be the one looking for the treasures of the city lord, and 13 would be the one staying outside to keep an eye out, just in case something unexpected happened. Truth be told, the boy wasn't really worried about the black snake being discovered. The Domini Mortis might only be a rank 1 monster, but it was blessed with many abilities to make up for its inability to rank up. Aside from its venom, the Domini Mortis could also turn its body as hard as steel. The ones who had lived for over 100 years could even turn their bodies as hard as adamant. All of them were also very stealthy creatures and couldn't be detected through normal means. Only extremely powerful individuals on the level of champions and above would be able to sense their presence. They were also blessed with the affinity to swim in rivers, sea, acidic bodies of water, molten lava, and poisonous water without getting hurt. Hazardous environments, such as those covered entirely with miasma, were not a problem for them. They could also dig in the ground, but this digging wasn't actually digging. As long as they willed it, they could travel under the ground as if they were in the water, bypassing almost any and all restrictions. The places they passed through underground would also revert back to their original state after the Domini Mortis was gone. Tiona was one of the blessed and cursed races of Solterra. Her race was so powerful that gods didn't allow them to rank up, for if they had that privilege, they would become the overlords of the world. Also, their number was very low, not more than 300 in the entirety of Solterra. They did not need to find a mate to reproduce. Just like honeybees and rattlesnakes, they could give birth to an egg anytime they wanted. However, Tiona's race could only give birth to an egg whenever one of their race died a natural death, was killed by a creature, or died due to an accident. They were that rare, and it was difficult for people to capture any of them due to their ability to escape whenever their lives were in danger by burrowing underground. The 7-year-old didn't know how Norris managed to capture Tiona or she was really captured. His guess was that the organization Norris belonged to had found the egg of a Domini Mortis and raised it in captivity. It must be the reason why Tiona wasn't as wild as the other members of her race and seemed like she was very used to seeing humans. The Domini Mortis usually stayed inside jungles or any other hidden areas of the world, far away from civilization and the people who would treat them like prized objects, since they would be sold in auctions for their rarity and prestige. But one thing was certain: whoever killed a Domini Mortis would also die. Elyon, the deity who represented death and destruction, would see to it that a sacred beast would not be killed in vain. This was another reason why many people wanted to tame or own a Domini Mortis. Owning one would give them a connection with Elyon, one of the beings who stood at the apex of the world. After entering the residence, Tiona flicked her tongue as she looked at her surroundings. Her race wasn't really treasure hunters, so finding treasures was not their forte. However, there was one thing they were good at, and that was detecting the presence of both the living and the dead. Sensing the location of all the living creatures inside the residence, Tiona headed to the western side of the residence, where only people of the apostle rank were located. Her guess was that they were the servants who served the city lord's needs and made sure that the residences were cleaned regularly. While the Black Snake was busy with her exploration, 13 was watching the mansion from the cover of the trees, making sure that he wouldn't be discovered. However, one of the guards patrolling the area had a very strong detection ability, making him feel that something unusual was somewhere in the forest. Because of this, his friend decided to tag along with him to check if something was out of place. Although 13 had slowed down his breathing and heartbeat, lowering his presence, the guard walked confidently toward his hiding place, making the 7-year-old think of excuses he could use once he was discovered. But when the two guards were only a dozen meters away from him, they heard hushed voices that made them stop in their tracks. "Romeo, we shouldn't do this here. Let's just do it home. My parents are not around." You say no, but I can see you're getting excited. The thrill of getting discovered turns you on, right? No, don't take off my clothes here. Don't suck too hard. Are you a baby? Juliet, you're so beautiful that I can't hold back. Why, you're bigger than I thought. It might not fit. If there's a will, there is a way. Don't worry, I'll make sure it fits. So hard. So deep. The two guards exchanged a knowing glance with each other and smirked at the same time. This wasn't the first time that they had caught such couples who wanted to spice up their relationship and seek the thrills of being captured by the guards who patrolled the city lord's residence. In fact, they would catch one or two couples doing it in the woods every week. The Tigerkins was a daring and bold race. They liked thrills, and the conquest of overcoming them brought them a sense of satisfaction and euphoria. Not so rough, Romeo. Don't bite me there. You're too sexy, Juliet. I'm not going to hand you to anyone. You're mine. One of the guards scratched his head as a sheepish smile appeared on his face. He then patted his friend's shoulder and made a pointing gesture behind them with his thumb. His comrade nodded his head in understanding and walked away with his friend, giving the two lovebirds some privacy and enjoying their memorable night together. Meanwhile, high above a tree branch, Polka, who was watching Visego's one-bird show, blinked once then twice, and even moved a step away from the Poco, who was having the time of his life. She didn't know how to feel after seeing one of her race do something so raunchy in an attempt to stop the two guards from discovering the 7-year-old, who was hiding behind a tree a few meters away from them. Polka watched with amusement when the two guards shared knowing smiles with each other before backing away. It seemed that they didn't plan on disturbing the couple, who were seeking the thrill of being discovered by them. When the guards had finally left the area, Polka heard the hooting of an owl. The one who made the sound was none other than Visego's master, Zion, and the meaning of his hooting was, "Well played, Visego. You're the best." Visego made a hooting sound in reply to his master's praise. Easy peasy. The two then made hooting sounds together, but this was just laughter in birds' language. Polka, who had decided to tag along with Visego, wondered if it was really okay to stay with these two eccentric individuals. However, the Poco had to admit that what Visego had done was quite interesting. It even made the two guards go back to their patrols instead of continuing their search. Staying with these two might be a little fun, Poca thought, not realizing that a faint tinge of mirth and even anticipation were starting to stir within the depths of her eyes. While Visego was making sure that 13 wasn't detected by the Tigerkins, who had very strong detection abilities, Tiona was peacefully exploring inside the residence. Even though she couldn't detect any treasures on her own, she had something that was helping her resolve this problem. On her tail, 13 had put on a ring that had the passive ability to detect treasure. This ring belonged to Norris, and according to him, it could detect if there were any lumps of gems, gold, or any other precious metals within the 10-meter radius of the wearer. It could detect these treasures even if they were underground, underwater, or hidden on the walls of a cavern. If a precious mineral was near it, it would alert its wearer by turning warm. Once the ring was close enough to the treasure, it would let out a small white light that only its wearer could see. This light would point in the direction of the treasure, which was why even Tiona could use it without problems. After exploring the entire western side of the residence, Tiona didn't detect any treasures, so she slowly made her way to the east side, where the city lord, Paven, was located. Of course, Tiona wouldn't go anywhere near the champion and the guards guarding him. She was only planning to go to the locations where it was safe for her to explore. Half an hour later, the ring on her tail started to feel warm, making Tiona excited. Wanting to help her master as much as Visego, she was taking this mission seriously. In order to prevent others from seeing her, she started crawling up to the ceiling. Once she was up above, she used her tail to pinpoint the exact location where it felt warmer. After double-checking that the ring was warmest in a certain direction, Tiona decided to retreat for the time being. The ring was pointing to the room where Paven was sleeping, and Tiona didn't want the champion to discover her. Knowing where the treasure was located was enough to make her scouting mission a success. 15 minutes later, the Black Snake had left the residence and returned to where her master was hiding. Due to her uncanny stealth ability that only champions could detect, Tiona initially wanted to prank her master by jumping behind his back. However, she had a feeling that 13 would react differently and might even attack her out of reflex. Since she didn't want that to happen, she decided to play it safe, deactivating her stealth ability, and slithered in front of her master so that he would see him. "Welcome back, Tiona," 13 said softly as the Black Snake crawled up his body and nudged her head against his cheek. Tiona hissed softly, telling her master that she had succeeded in her mission. "Good job." 13 lightly patted the snake's head with his finger before slowly backing away from his hiding spot. Since his beast companion had returned, it was time for him to return to the inn before the others woke up and discovered that he had left without informing any of them. Seeing his movements, Visego spread his wings and took flight. Poca followed behind him and soared toward the sky. Visego circled around the residence and made a hooting sound, telling his master that the coast was clear. With the Poca Poco guiding him from the sky, 13 managed to return to the inn within an hour, climbing back up the window with the help of his grappling hook. Visego and Poca were last to enter the window and landed on top of the table. 13 closed the window behind them before taking 3 wooden bowls and filling them up with water. Tiona, Visego, and Poca drank until their thirst was sated. A moment later, 13 also placed several nuts on the table, allowing the 2 Poca Pocos to eat. Tiona, on the other hand, received a small rank 1 beast core as a reward for her hard work. After the 3 were done eating, the Black Snake began her report and told her master that the treasures were being kept inside Paven's quarters inside the residence. 13 didn't find this news surprising because it was indeed the safest place inside the residence. Of course, he also knew that the city lord might be keeping his most important treasures inside his storage ring that he always carried on his person. There was nothing the boy could do about that, but there must still be treasures that the city lord wasn't carrying, and he would not hesitate to get them. "When I meet Laplace Demon again, I will ask for another dimensional storage as a reward," 13 mused. "I'll ask him to make it bigger so that I can use it to store some loot." After thanking Tiona and Visego for the second time, 13 and his sidekicks decided to rest for the remainder of the night. Tomorrow was another day, and there were still many things to see and do in the city. Meanwhile, in Groner City, Christopher stood in the makeshift archery field in the warehouse and shot one arrow after the other. He was only using crude wooden arrows for practice because he didn't want to use their stock of iron arrows. The chubby boy had no talent in archery, but 13 told him that archery was a skill that could be learned. Because of this, he asked Lady Adira to give him some advice on how to properly shoot some arrows. Perhaps wanted to score some brownie points with the 7-year-old, the drow agreed to teach the chubby boy, whom 13 had declared to be his right-hand man, the proper ways of archery. It wasn't easy, but Christopher persevered. He didn't want to always rely on the younger boy, who had promised to take him back home to Pangea safely. After his young master had been captured, Christopher almost fell into depression. That was when he realized that he had become too dependent on Zion, to the point that the latter's absence made him feel as if he had lost something important in his life. Christopher's will wasn't that strong. He couldn't decide things on his own, and he was reliant on others pushing him in the right direction. He was fine with this setup, since that was what he originally wanted, to be a retainer who would just follow his master's orders. He had long accepted that he was not smart, not cunning, and most of all, not really good at fighting. But everyone could change as long as they put effort into the thing they wanted to achieve. If it's important to you, you will find a way, Christopher muttered as he pulled back the string of the bow and aimed at his target. If not, you will find an excuse. After saying those words, the chubby boy released the arrow. Instead of hitting his target, it hit the wall of the warehouse, making his arrow bounce off it. Christopher took a deep breath before taking another wooden arrow from his quiver. He then took the proper archery stance that Lady Adira had taught him and blocked off everything in his surroundings. The only thing he could see was the target in front of him. Soon, a whistling sound hummed in the surroundings as Christopher's arrow took flight. This time, the arrow hit the very edge of his target. Instead of being disappointed, a faint smile appeared on the boy's lips as he remembered the words that 13 told him while they were traveling toward Groner City for the first time. "I am not afraid of a person who knows 1,000 techniques," 13 said with a faint smile on his face. "But I fear the person who has practiced the same technique 1,000 times. Christopher, if you wish to become truly strong, don't be a jack of all trades like me, because I am the only one who can pull it off. Focus on one thing and surpass everyone in that field. Someday, you will wake up and realize that the people whom you looked up to as geniuses would look at you with the same gaze that you used to look at them." Christopher had asked 13 if that day would truly come because he felt like his young master was only encouraging him to not make him look pitiful. The 7-year-old's answer was simple. "You'll never know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice." 13 smirked. "I will not always be with you, and during those times, you need to fend for yourself. So, be strong, Christopher, for you have the potential to become a true powerhouse in this world." Deep inside, Christopher wanted to believe 13's words that he could become one of those people that he looked up to. Geniuses from the prestigious families, prodigies from the monarch clans, as well as the rising stars of his generation. But more than anything else, he wanted to stand on the same stage as his young master, whom he believed would make his mark on both worlds. "Wait for me, young master," Christopher said as he took another arrow from his quiver. "I'll catch up to you soon." The sound of whistling wind echoed in the surroundings, making the drow, who was drinking some alcohol on top of the roof of the warehouse, smile faintly as she looked in the direction of the rising sun, signaling the start of another day in the world of Solterra. After his late-night escapade, 13 slept and only woke up at around noon, with only Alina watching over him. He didn't expect to sleep that long, but he had no regrets either. For him, being able to rest properly was a good sign, especially since he was still a growing boy. Vasego and Poco were also inside the inn and had just finished eating the nuts Alina had given them for lunch. "Hungry, Zion?" Alina asked as soon as she noticed that the boy was awake. "Very," 13 replied before doing a few stretches. "I'll get you something to eat downstairs. What do you want?" "A sandwich is fine." "Understood." After Elyon left the room, 13 sat on the chair and rested his chin on the palm of his hand, looking at the two Pocopocos who were also looking at him. Vasego, have you memorized the voices of the city lord, as well as the people stationed inside his residence? 13 asked. I only managed to get half of them, Vasego replied. Some of the servants didn't go out of the residence, so I didn't get to hear their voices, but I already memorized the voices of the city lord and the guards. 13 smirked. Good job. That is more than enough. But if you have the opportunity to memorize the voices of the other servants, go for it as well. Understood. Vasego nodded. Shall I go back to the city lord's residence and try my luck then? Yes. But don't feel bad if you don't get the voices of the rest of the servants. We still have a few days, so there's no rush. Okay. 13 then glanced outside of their window and looked at the bustling city. He almost felt sorry that their peaceful life would suddenly change in a few days, but he knew that this was something that he had to do in order to give the Sumatran kingdom a chance to avoid a major disaster. Vasego, am I a bad person? 13 asked all of a sudden while still looking at the city outside the window. Yes, master, Vasego replied in a heartbeat. You are a bad person. Tiona glared and hissed at the Pocopoco, as if telling him that her master was not a bad person. 13 smiled and lightly patted the angry Tiona's head with a finger, calming her down. I would have doubted your words if you said that I was not a bad person, 13 stated. So what do you think, Poca? Since you already know that I'm a bad person, shouldn't you start distancing yourself from me? The 7-year-old then turned to look at the Pocopoco beside Vasego. As you can see, I intend to do more bad things in the future, and it will not just stop in this city, 13 said in a mischievous tone. Pocopocos are righteous by nature, so you being with us might make you bad as well. Vasego didn't have a choice because the two of us made a deal, which left him no choice but to serve me for a few years in exchange for his freedom. You, on the other hand, are free to do whatever you like. However, I'm only taking those who will help accomplish my goal on this journey. I am a very calculative person, you see. I like to be in control. Variables like you, who are outside of my control, make me uneasy. So, I'll give you until tomorrow to decide whether you will stay with us or not. If you choose to stay, know that you will have to listen to my orders, just like Vasego does. You cannot question me in any way because, like I said, I'm a bad person who does bad things. 13 eyed the Pocopoco to make sure that Poca understood what he was trying to tell her. Poca nodded in understanding before saying the word, okay, which meant that she would give the boy her answer when morning came. Good. That is all. 13 once again shifted his attention to the city outside of the window. You may now go, Vasego. Also, give the city a good look from the sky. If you see anything of interest, report it to me when you return. Understood, Vasego replied before spreading his wings. A moment later, he flew outside of the window, leaving Poca behind. Poca hesitated before spreading her wings to follow Vasego. But, before she left the room, she said something to 13, which made the boy smile. I like bad boys too, you know. After saying those words, the Pocopoco flew out of the window to fly alongside Vasego and accompany him on his mission. If Poca agreed to work with 13, the exchange of messages between him, the general, as well as Christopher and Rihanna, would become faster. Tiona, who was now left alone with her master, nudged her head on his cheek, asking to be spoiled. The boy chuckled and rubbed her head until she was satisfied. A few minutes later, Elyon entered the room with a platter of food in her hand. Master, I overheard people in the tavern talking about the festival that will start in a few days, Elyon reported. The Harvest Festival, right? 13 smiled faintly. Yes, Elyon replied. The Harvest Festival that you plan to ruin. The Tigerkin had a conflicted look on her face because this was a tradition among the Tigerkins, especially after a good harvest. People would eat, drink, and make merry, for this was an annual event and a very important one for their people. 13 planned to execute his plan on the day of the festival to make it more memorable. He didn't pick the date at random. No, he picked it exactly because it was a significant event for the Tigerkins. On this day, all of them would witness something tragic, which would shake them to their very core. Elyon, you're too kind, 13 said as he moved the plate of food towards him. Even now, I can see in your eyes that you want me to think of other ways to keep this war from happening without endangering the livelihood of others. But desperate times call for desperate measures. You might not believe it, but this is truly the most peaceful way that I can think of to resolve this issue. Sure, it might inconvenience the Sumatran kingdom for a few days, but your kingdom has enough food to make up for the losses that your people will suffer due to the loss of your surplus of wheat and meat. Without food and weapons, your armies cannot march into war. So we need to eliminate the supply to ensure that we can minimize the losses that your people will suffer in the future. Don't worry, I won't ask for your forgiveness or anything. Since I have taken this path, I will see it through until the end. Feel free to stay here and close your eyes if you wish, but don't stop me. Don't try to stop me. After saying these words, 13 started to eat the food that Alina had brought to him. Even though his guard didn't say anything, he understood that she was opposed to what they planned to do. But she still followed him for a reason, and that was to see with her own eyes whether the 7-year-old was telling the truth or not. If he were lying to them, Alina would not hesitate or feel guilty about taking his life in exchange for the hardship that her people would face in his hands. On the day of the Harvest Festival, the city was livelier than ever before. There were colorful festival decorations hanging over the streets, giving the surroundings a more festive vibe. The people had been decorating their city for the past few days, and 13 and his group decided to join the festivities in the afternoon. They ate food from street stalls, bought souvenirs, and watched a few performances on the streets. 13 allowed his team to enjoy the Harvest Festival, but there was something that he forbade them to do, and that was to get drunk. The operation that they would do later in the evening was very important, and he needed everyone to be sober when they started their operation. In the eyes of the locals, they were one of the countless tourists who had come from faraway places just to experience their festival. Because of this, they made sure to treat them with great hospitality and gave them a memorable experience. Even Bisego and Poca snacked on various delicacies that they had never tasted before. After thinking long and hard, Poca decided to stay and join 13's group, which significantly enhanced their scouting party's abilities. During the days leading up to the Harvest Festival, 13 and the others memorized the locations where they would attack while everyone in the city was exhausted from partying and drinking. Drunk people would not be able to move fast enough to extinguish the flames that they would be setting at midnight, which would make this the most memorable harvest festival of their lives. 13 was smiling from ear to ear when he noticed that even the city guards were getting drunk as they let their inhibitions loose for a day so that they could enjoy the festival. Even the city lord, Pavan, made an appearance at the plaza and gave a speech. Aside from congratulating everyone for a bountiful harvest, he once again mentioned the upcoming war against the barbarians and raised the importance of winning for the sake of the Sumatran kingdom. The 7-year-old listened to the old man's speech while eating the meat skewers that he had bought from one of the stalls near the plaza. Aside from Parnia City, 2 other cities would suffer a similar fate later that same night. They were none other than Dun City, where Anwer was currently located, and Rosinda City, where Amory and his team of assassins were stationed. Rosinda City was governed by one of the city lords from the conservative faction, who was an ally of General Stark. The main reason why 13 decided to target this place as well was to ensure that the radical faction would not think that they were the only ones who were targeted during the Harvest Festival. The second reason was that Rosinda City had the 3rd largest granary in the Sumatran kingdom. 13 believed that if the major granaries, including the underground basements where the preserved meat was stored, were compromised, the war preparations of the radical faction would come to a screeching halt. Even if the radical faction were to declare that this was the doing of the barbarians and rally their people to fight without food and weapons, their army wouldn't even have the strength to cross the strait that led to the barbarian lands. They had tried to invade that region in the past, but they were repelled by the very people who didn't shy away from war itself. The Tigerkins had recognized how powerful the barbarians were, alongside their allies, the orcs. If they were to really attack them based on emotional outbursts, their army would suffer major losses. It would not even be an exaggeration to say that if they lost, the barbarians could mount a counterattack, conquering their lands in the process. When Pavin's speech ended, he was met with thunderous applause, proving his popularity with the city's people. 13 clapped alongside the others so that he wouldn't stand out in the crowd. Tiona wasn't coiled around his neck because the Tigerkins could easily recognize her for what she was. As an alternative, she coiled around 13's arm and turned herself into steel, forming a black snake armlet on her master's arm. "Everyone, get into positions," 13 said in a volume that only his teammates could hear. "You all already know what to do. Remember, failure is not an option." Dixon, Armand, Thane, and Alina all nodded their heads at the same time. Visago and Poca, who were perched on top of one of the roofs in the plaza, watched as their master's team divided themselves into 3 groups. Dixon and Thane would head toward the granary, while Armand and Alina would head towards the barracks. 13, on the other hand, would head toward the city lord's residence with Tiona, Visago, and Poca. It was already dark, but the city was brightly lit with paper lanterns illuminating the streets. 13 walked confidently towards his destination without worrying about what others would think of him. He was wearing a festival mask over his face and carried 2 meat skewers in his hand. In the eyes of others, he was just a child, enjoying the festival like everyone else. A few even asked him if he was lost, but he just told them that he wasn't and wished them a happy harvest festival. When he finally arrived near the forest, 13 walked the off-beaten path, away from the eyes of the people. Tiona reverted to her snake form once more and coiled herself around 13's neck, guiding his steps in the darkness. Above him, 2 Pocos circled the forest, hooting from time to time, telling him that there was no danger in the surroundings. They still had a few hours before their operation began, but all of them wanted to position themselves in the best possible locations to ensure that their individual goals had a higher chance of succeeding. "Tiona, remember this. Our goal is to steal, not to fight," 13 said softly. "If the situation asks for it, escaping is the top priority no matter what. Do you understand?" Tiona nodded her head before flicking her forked tongue on her master's right cheek as if assuring him that she understood everything. The 2 moons of Solterra illuminated the surroundings, so it wasn't that dark, allowing 13 to navigate his way in the forest and arrive at the corner of the residence, where the guards rarely stepped while on patrol. When he reached his destination, he sat cross-legged behind a tree and controlled his breathing, lowering the speed of his heartbeat. Soon, he sat like a stone statue, melding with his surroundings. This was his form of meditation, which allowed him to calm his mind and raise his body's performance to the peak. He stayed in this position for a few hours until he heard Visago's hooting, signaling him that it was almost time to start their operation. 13 slowly opened his eyes, and a faint smile appeared on his face. "It's showtime," 13 muttered. Tiona nodded her head in understanding as she crawled down from her master's body and slithered toward the wall of the residence in order to climb it. Visago also moved to grab the grappling hook in 13's hand and flew above the wall of the residence, securing it in place. The 7-year-old then nimbly climbed the wall and laid down over it, making his body as undetectable as possible. He and Tiona looked toward the east, where the granary was located. A few minutes later, something lit up in the distance, which informed 13 that their operation had officially begun. One of the guards, who was slightly drunk and manning the gate of the residence, saw the flames in the east and started shouting. "Lord Pavin, the granary is burning," the guard shouted. "The granary is burning." A moment later, the old Tigerkin rushed to the gate and looked at the distance with a grim expression on his face. "All of you follow me," Pavin roared. "We will extinguish those flames no matter what." "Yes, Lord Pavin." Almost everyone in the residence left to run toward the east, allowing the 7-year-old and the black snake to enter the city lord's residence undetected. This was going to be a long night, and 13 was more than eager to use every second of it to loot the city lord's residence while its master was away. As soon as the Tigerkins from the residence left to help extinguish the raging flames in the granary, a 7-year-old boy, a black snake, and a Poco snuck inside the residence to conduct their looting operation. Poca would remain outside to stand watch and inform them if anything unexpected were to happen. Webnovel.com. Not all Tigerkins had left the residence. According to Tiona, there were 4 servants who remained, and one of them was a grandmaster, whose duty was to guard the estate while his master was away. 13 sneakily made his way toward Pavin's room, where Tiona had sensed the presence of treasures. The Domini Mortis was also paying close attention to the Grandmaster Guard to ensure that he wouldn't come across her master. Visago had perched himself on one of the open windows of the residence, ready to use Pavin's voice to catch the attention of anyone who might go to where his master was. A few minutes later, Tiona stopped in front of a door and pointed her tail at it, gesturing that this was the room where she had sensed the treasure. 13 nodded and slowly turned the handle of the door. Surprisingly, it was locked. It looked like Pavin didn't forget to lock it before leaving the residence, which made the boy confirm that the city lord had a good head on his shoulders. Well, it doesn't really matter, 13 mused as he took out his thief kit from his dimensional space and started to pick the lock of the door using the tools he had specially brought for this occasion. Tiona, who had been paying close attention to the Grandmaster, made a low hiss, informing her master that the guard was headed in their direction. 13 nodded in acknowledgement as he continued to open the lock on the door. He could now hear the footsteps of the guard from the hallway, but he remained calm as he tinkered with the keyhole. After what seemed like an eternity, a faint clicking sound reached his ear. The guard, who was patrolling the interior of the estate, frowned when he heard the faint clicking noise in the direction of his master's room. Immediately, he hastened his steps to check if one of the servants was doing something funny. When he turned into the corner, he saw no one in the hallway. The Tigerkin frowned and went toward the door of his master's room and turned the knob. "Am I just imagining things?" the Tigerkin muttered as he released the handle of the door. "It might be because I drank a bit earlier when I went to town to celebrate the festival." The guard sighed before resuming his patrol inside the residence. Inside Pavin's personal quarters, 13 sat on the floor, with his back leaning against the door. He had controlled his breathing to make sure that the Tigerkin wouldn't detect anything, but it was truly a close call. If he had been a second late in opening the door, he would have definitely been discovered, and that would have ended badly for him. After Tiona informed him that it was now safe to move, the boy took a few deep breaths before breathing normally. "That was close," 13 thought before speaking in a low volume. "Where is it, Tiona?" The black snake crawled toward the bookshelf at the corner of the room and used her tail to point at it. 13 nodded in understanding and scrutinized the bookshelf. Bookshelves were usually used to hide hidden passages inside many noble homes, so the boy already had an idea about what to do. A few moments later, he started to move the books one by one, looking for the trigger that would help open the hidden passageway. Tiona also helped move the books that were not within 13's reach, but after moving all the books, the bookshelf remained in place. "I see. Then the trigger must not be in the bookshelf," 13 mused as he scanned the surroundings. "It must be this." The boy asked Tiona to push down the torch that was hanging on the wall, which was 2 meters away from the bookshelf. The black snake obeyed, and just as 13 expected, the bookshelf moved when the torch was pushed down like a lever. There was indeed a hidden passage behind the bookshelf, but the only problem was that there were no lights to light the way. Fortunately, 13 had prepared for this possibility, so he took out a glowstone from his dimensional storage, which he had taken from the general's residence. With the stone in hand, 13 was able to see 2 meters ahead of him, allowing him to see the staircase that led deep underground. He knew that he was short on time, so he hurriedly descended to see what was waiting for him at the bottom. After descending the last step, the boy found himself in a spacious underground room, which made his eyes widen in shock. *T, 13 muttered as he came face to face with a giant snake that was at least 10 meters long, looking at him with hostility. The 7-year-old didn't expect that there would be a monster guarding the hidden underground cavern under Pavin's room, and a glance was enough for him to recognize what it was. It was none other than a Rocky Balboa, a rank 5 monster whose body looked like it was made of rocks. This monster lived in rocky mountains, underground caverns, or generally anywhere with rugged terrain, allowing it to hide and ambush its prey with ease. The venom it possessed wasn't fatal to humans, but it could still cause paralysis. It then killed its opponents by constricting them with its large body, which was as hard as a rock, grinding them and breaking their bones in the process. Once it deemed that its prey could no longer offer any resistance, it would then swallow them whole and digest them inside their bodies. With a screech that made 13's skin crawl, the giant rock snake lunged at him with its jaws open wide. It fully intended to devour the little human boy who had snuck inside its territory to steal the treasures that it was guarding. A loud screech echoed inside the spacious cavern as the Rocky Balboa lunged at the boy with the intention of swallowing him whole. 13 hurriedly jumped to his right side and rolled on the ground to evade the rock snake's preemptive strike. The ground shook when the snake's head slammed against the spot where the boy originally stood, blocking his only path of escape. 13 took out his bow from his dimensional storage and knocked an arrow. With one fluid motion, he sent his arrow flying toward the snake's head. However, the Rocky Balboa tilted its head to the side, making the arrow bounce off its body. The boy had targeted the snake's eyes. Unfortunately, his opponent was already an adult monster who'd had its fair share of fights in the wild. This wasn't the first time that its eyes had been targeted by its opponents, so it already mastered the means of defending itself from such attacks. 13 unleashed 2 more arrows in rapid succession, but just like what happened earlier, his attacks merely bounced off its head, unable to even pierce its rocky exterior. Growing annoyed at the human boy's futile attempts to injure it, the snake raised its head in preparation to strike. Seeing that he was in a tight spot, the 7-year-old decided to use his trump card, which he planned to use if he fought strong opponents who were nearly impossible for him to defeat. "I guess I have no choice." 13 gritted his teeth as he reached out to grab something from his dimensional storage. The rocky snake screeched and once again lunged itself at the boy, this time making sure that it wouldn't miss. But before the Rocky Balboa and 13 could clash for a second time, Tiona jumped between the two of them and let out a shriek that made the Rocky Balboa stop its attack midway. 13, who was holding a small wooden barrel in his hand, also stopped mid-throw because the rocky snake had stopped its attack and was looking at Tiona with a conflicted look on its face. The black snake hissed repeatedly while lashing her tail on the ground as if she were berating the rocky snake for attacking her master. To 13's surprise, the Rocky Balboa cowered in the face of Tiona's angry hisses, making him blink in confusion. As far as he knew, the Domini Mortis didn't have the ability to dominate other snakes. In fact, snakes often hunted other snakes and would happily eat each other if given the opportunity. Even the Domini Mortis should not be an exception to this rule. They would often hunt other snakes as well as get eaten by other snakes. Fewin.com. Of course, if these snakes ate the Domini Mortis, they would find themselves dying from either the black snake's poison or in the hands of one of Apollyon's minions who would come to avenge their sacred beast. Tiona crawled toward the Rocky Balboa while hissing angrily. The rocky snake, on the other hand, crawled toward the corner of the cavern and coiled itself, hiding its head. The intimidating snake, who had originally planned to eat the human boy, now looked like a pitiful child that was being nagged at by their mom. Only Tiona's angry hissing echoed on the walls of the cavern, making 13 scratch his head. After making sure that the rocky snake wouldn't attack him anymore, the boy then looked at the other side of the room where an altar was located. Curious about what it was, the 7-year-old approached it cautiously and made sure to not touch anything until he was sure that it was safe to touch. A few minutes later, 13's face turned grim when he realized what the mirror and the other tools on the altar were. "It seems that my assessment is wrong," 13 muttered. "It's not Brigham communicating with the third party. It's Paven." The boy already knew who the third party was, which was also why he was tempted to escape toward the mainland while he still had time. However, he couldn't do that because if he escaped, Christopher, Rihanna, and the rest of the wanderers who appeared in the Valbera archipelago would be trapped in Solterra forever. Even if they reached a city that had a warp gate that connected to Pangea, the laws of wanderers would not allow them to cross the two worlds because they still hadn't completed their mission to become a rookie. This was why 13 was thinking of a way that would allow the wanderers to light the beacon of hope so that all of them could return to Pangea before the entire Valbera archipelago descended into chaos. But after this discovery, he knew that his original plan needed to be revised, and it needed to be done quickly. 13's original goal was to loot Paven's treasury. But if he touched even a single artifact laid out on the altar, something terrible was going to happen. Aside from that, he also didn't want to let the third party know that their plan had already been compromised. Tiona, can you tell this guy to keep everything that happened here secret? 13 asked. Tiona nodded before using her tail to tap on the body of the coiled Rocky Balboa, forcing it to look at the little snake who was hundreds of times smaller than it. The black snake hissed softly as if it were a parent telling its child to listen to her words. A moment later, the Rocky Balboa nodded its head and hissed back at Tiona, telling her that it would keep everything that happened a secret. After getting the Rocky Snake's promise, 13 left the city lord's residence as silently and as quickly as he could. Fortunately, he didn't bump into the guard that was patrolling the estate as he made his way towards the forest. Good thing I made a plan B, 13 thought. There is still time. I can still make it. The 7-year-old then made hooting sounds, giving Visego a command. The Poco hooted back before flying toward an inn, which was a distance away from the inn where they were staying. When Poca had agreed to become one of 13's helpers, he had asked Visego to make a short trip to Karabayur City to send a message to Rafiki. Fortunately, the shaman replied in a positive manner and agreed to his request. Poca, who was left to watch over 13, circled around the sky as she followed the boy who was running toward the east, where the granary was located. He didn't even have time to ponder how Tiona managed to subdue the Rocky Balboa earlier. But he was certain that it was due to the black snake's hidden ability. Perhaps Tiona had the ability to subjugate snakes and pythons. But with the situation on hand, he would have to wait before delving into this topic. His goal was to go to where the city lord was currently at and muster all the forces at his disposal to take action. 13 no longer planned to settle for breadcrumbs. He decided to catch the big fish and make sure that it wouldn't get away from his grasp. Almost all the guards of Parnia City rushed toward the east when they saw smoke rising from the granaries burning in the distance. They left their barracks unprotected because it didn't even cross their mind that someone in the city might attack them, let alone set them on fire. Unfortunately for them, this was part of the intricate plan of a 7-year-old to turn their happy festival into a disaster. Just a few minutes after the soldiers left their barracks, Armand and Alina snuck inside and headed straight to where they were storing their weapons and ammunition. They were carrying several oil barrels in their storage rings, which was more than enough to set the entire barracks ablaze. The two moved with haste, placing the barrels in strategic locations before backing away. Armand had a grim look on his face because he never thought that there would come a day when he would sabotage his own race just to keep a war from happening. "Let's go," Alina shouted, snapping Armand from his daze. "Burn it, Armand." "Damn it." Armand cursed out loud as he summoned a small flame in his hands, which he threw to one of the barrels that was near the weapons racks. Once he was done, he turned around to run as fast as he could without turning back. A few seconds later, several loud explosions rumbled inside the barracks, setting it ablaze. Armand and Alina were able to escape safely and fled in the opposite direction of the barracks. They knew that they only had a few precious minutes before some of the guards returned to put out the fire in the barracks. After making sure that they had run a sufficient distance, the two made a detour to go to the meeting place they had all agreed on beforehand to go to after they finished their part. Armand and Alina suddenly found themselves running alongside many people who were either heading to the barracks or the granary to put out the flames. It was complete pandemonium, and everyone in the city rose up to lend their hand. Unfortunately, the majority of the men were drunk, so their movements were slow. If this incident happened on an ordinary day, they would have already arrived at their destinations. 13 had deliberately chosen to execute their operation on the day of the Harvest Festival because he was hoping that everyone would be too drunk to do anything. His gamble worked, and because of this, the flames spread like wildfire, even burning the forest behind the granary, making it a hellish sight. Half an hour later, The two arrived at the meeting place and saw Dixon and Thane already waiting for them. "Where is Zion?" Alina asked. "He's still not here," Dixon replied. "It might take him a while to return, so I suggest we—" Before Dixon could even finish whatever he was going to say, Visego landed on the roof above their heads. "Head to the granary. We have a change of plans," Visego stated using his master's voice. "Find an opportunity to neutralize and capture Pavan Murdosk. I am currently headed there right now." "Is he crazy?" Armand gasped in shock. "How can we possibly capture the city lord when almost all the warriors are at the granary right now?" "Of course, we will not capture him when he is surrounded by people," Visego replied. "We will find an opportunity to catch him when he heads back to his residence. We're going to catch him with just us." Armand looked at the Poco in disbelief. "Do you really believe that we can do that? With only the four of you, it's impossible," Visego stated. "But we have reinforcements on our side." 5 people suddenly made their presence known, making the 4 Tigerkins take out their weapons. However, when Dixon and the rest saw the man leading the 5 humans, a look of surprise appeared on their faces. "Why you?" Dixon stuttered. "What are you doing here?" "Because being here is more interesting than staying in Karabayr City," the man wearing a robe replied. "Now, let's not waste any time and find our target." "Seriously, that boy's boldness is growing on me. Now I understand why the mistress wants him to become her adopted son." Armand, Thane, and Alina looked at their leader to see whether he would agree to Zion's last-minute changes to their plan. However, after seeing the reinforcement, he couldn't help but wonder how the boy managed to gather this kind of manpower without telling any of them. "Very well, let's go," Dixon stated. "But tell me later how all of you arrived here, okay?" "Sure." The robe man nodded. "We have a traitor to catch." 13 ran as fast as he could, no longer try to hide his whereabouts. He was quite far from the city lord's residence, so it was not a problem even if he were discovered by someone. The boy could just make an excuse that he had seen the fire in the distance and wanted to offer his help to the best of his ability. Also, no one would even think that someone as young as him would dare to enter the city lord's residence on his own. When 13 arrived at the scene, he was unable to proceed any further since there were thousands of people blocking his path. Because of this, he decided to climb one of the roofs in an attempt to find the city lord among the masses. Only when he managed to climb a rooftop did he see the extent of the damage that was happening before him. The entire forest was burning, which illuminated the darkness of the night. Due to how bright the surroundings were, 13 was able to spot the city lord, who was at the very front of the people, giving orders to create a blockade to prevent the flames from expanding. The forest was a good distance away from the eastern edges of the city, so there was no threat of the fire spreading toward the city. Pavan also understood that it was too late to save the granary and the underground food storage, so the only thing he could do was minimize the damage as much as possible. The champions used their strongest attacks to create ditches, preventing the fire from spreading in the surroundings. Everyone who had strong, explosive attacks was at the front lines, creating a control line, while those who had come to help in the beginning only stood there to cheer them on. There were people who could use water spells, but in the face of such a huge inferno, their spells didn't do a lot of help. Because of this, they simply assisted those at the front to ensure that the flames would not move beyond the boundaries that were created to suppress them. 13 then gazed towards the west, where another blazing inferno was taking place. Fortunately, the barracks were far from the main housing facilities of the city, which guaranteed that the flames wouldn't harm the innocents. "What a mess," 13 muttered. "I'm just glad that no one was hurt." The people that were standing on the roof beside 13 all nodded their heads. They all agreed that what the boy said was true. None of them had foreseen that such a tragedy would occur, especially when they were celebrating the Harvest Festival, which was one of the most important festivals of the year. While everyone was watching the world burn around them, 13 heard the hooting of the owl, letting him know that his reinforcements were now headed in his direction. Although he wanted to watch for a little while longer, he knew that time was precious. Because of this, he left the roof in order to reunite with his teammates, who would help him deal with the city lord, who was fuming in anger due to the losses he had suffered in just the span of a single night. The city lord of Parnia's city, Pavan, was livid after hearing the report of his subordinate. Not only were their granary and underground food storage arson, but their barracks also caught fire. For a brief moment, he even thought that his own residence might be set on fire next. But fortunately, his worst fears didn't happen. The altar in the underground basement of his residence was very important because it allowed him to communicate with that person who would soon make him the king of the Sumatran kingdom. He was fine with letting Brigham think that he was the one manipulating the scenes from behind and controlling the radical faction like a puppet master. After all, the true person who had been playing everyone else along on the palm of his hand was none other than him, Pavan. He was the one chosen by that being to become the king of the Sumatran kingdom, and later, the entire Valbera archipelago. All he needed to give that person in return was his undying loyalty, which he didn't mind giving. For this reason, he worked very hard and made use of all the connections he had to speed up the war preparations. But just as everything was going smoothly, tragedy struck. Damn it! Pavan cursed internally when the blazing flames finally settled down, leaving only scorched land behind. As the city lord of the city, he did his best to keep up his dignified act on the surface, but his anger still got the best of him. However, it didn't seem to affect how the people thought of him. The reason? They were just as angry as he was. They were happily celebrating the harvest festival when the granary, which had stored their harvest, burst into flames. Today was supposed to be a festival of bountiful harvest. Yet after this incident, the thing they were celebrating for was burned, and people started to fear that they wouldn't have any food to put on the table for the next few days. Some of you stay here and ensure that the flames don't reignite, Pavan commanded. Sawyer, come. The commander of the guards, who was stationed in the city, appeared before the city lord with a determined look on his face. Have you found any leads about who caused this incident? Pavan inquired. No, sir, Sawyer replied. We've interviewed a few people, but none of them had seen anything suspicious. The guard guarding the granary were knocked unconscious and dragged away. They didn't see who attacked them or why. Do you think the barbarians are involved? Pavan asked. Sawyer was about to shake his head, but stopped himself midway. The possibility exists, sir, Sawyer answered. However, if they can infiltrate this deep into our kingdom, then it means that we are in greater danger than we originally thought. Since Pavan couldn't do anything about his losses, he decided to use this tragedy in order to rally the Tigerkins and make a declaration that as long as the barbarians were not subjugated, the Sumatran kingdom would never be safe. This was a good plan, and he believed that the king would support him after this incident. Little did he know that the same thing had happened to the third and fourth cities with the biggest granaries and underground food reserves in the kingdom. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this move by 13 crippled the Valbera kingdom, preventing them from mounting an all-out war against the barbarians. The king would naturally prioritize his people and would open the palace reserves to ensure that everyone had enough food to eat. After doing that, they would no longer have enough to feed their army as they marched across the Valberian Strait to attack the barbarian lands. Of course, Pavan still didn't know this. The only thing running in his mind was to find a way to turn this tragedy into an opportunity to start the war at an earlier time. Put the city under martial law, and don't let anyone out unless I give you explicit permission to do so. Pavan ordered. Catch everyone who tries to flee, and throw them in prison. Interrogate anyone suspicious, regardless of whether they are innocent or not. Make sure to double the city's security and triple the number of guards watching over the gate. I want Parnia to be in a complete lockdown. Do I make myself clear? Sawyer nodded. Yes, sir. After he was dismissed, the commander of the city guards immediately rallied his captains and gave them his orders. Pavan then motioned for his own guards to return with him to his residence to rest. The fires raged for 4 hours before they were completely brought under control. Truth be told, Pavan was already exhausted, and only his rage was keeping him standing. As they made their way back to the residence, the city lord couldn't help but see the fear and anxiety in the eyes of his people. He planned to make a speech in the plaza a few hours later, but he decided to rest first and let the situation calm down a bit. There were still at least 2 to 3 hours before sunrise, and the sky was still dark. But darkness had never posed a problem for Tigerkins because they had dark vision. When they arrived at the residence, the Grand Master, who had stayed to protect the residence, was the first to greet his master. "Welcome back, my lord." The Grand Master greeted Paven, who nodded back to him in response. "Were there any problems while I was away?" Paven asked. The Grand Master hesitated for a bit before nodding his head. "Yes, sir. There was a problem," the Grand Master replied with a pained expression on his face. "My lord, you have entered a trap." Before Paven could even understand what the guard was trying to tell him, the gate of his residence opened, and several masked individuals stormed in. The City Lord's protectors immediately took action, but their eyes widened in shock the moment they clashed with the intruders who appeared out of nowhere. "Champions!" the leader of Paven's personal guard shouted. "Run, City Lord!" The leader of the guards was also a champion and had been serving Paven faithfully over the years. He had his fair share of troubles, but he never expected that someone was bold enough to attack Paven in his own residence. Just as he was about to run to the City Lord's side in order to keep him safe, an arrow flew in his direction, forcing him to dodge to the side. 2 more arrows followed suit, completely stopping him from reaching the City Lord in time, forcing him to fight against the masked men who had gotten close enough to attack him. 13, who was on top of the roof of the residence, fired 1 arrow after another, targeting the guards who had escorted Paven back to the residence. All of his arrows had been laced with a concentrated syrup of the sleepy wolfsbane, making those who were hit by his arrows feel their bodies becoming heavy. Finally understanding what was happening, Paven no longer hesitated and ran toward the wall of his residence, intending to climb over it. 13 gave his target a sidelong glance, but he didn't bother to fire even a single arrow in his direction. The 7-year-old continued to provide cover fire to support his people, who were quickly subjugating the guards, still doing their best to resist. Paven didn't even look back at his subordinates and ran as fast as he could. He believed that as long as he could climb over the wall, he would be able to hide inside the forest until help arrived. The City Lord was also a champion, but he didn't specialize in combat. He had used his wealth to attain the rank he currently had, so he was only a champion in rank but not in skill. Just a little more, Paven thought as he prepared to jump over the wall in order to reach safety. But just as he was about to jump over the wall, 4 robed individuals appeared before him, blocking his path. "Why are you doing this?" Paven roared as he tried to attack one of the robed assailants who tried to ambush him. But since he wasn't a fighter, his attack was easily deflected. Dixon, whom Paven was facing, didn't hesitate to punch the City Lord's stomach, making the latter curl up like a shrimp. Not giving Paven any chances, Dixon gave a finishing chop on the back of the City Lord's head, knocking him unconscious. "Secure him," Dixon ordered as he gazed in the direction where their reinforcements were fighting with the City Lord's personal guards. "I'll clean up the rest." Without even waiting for an answer, Dixon joined the fight and helped neutralize the enemies, knocking all of them unconscious. Even the champion, who was meant to act as the City Lord's bodyguard, was unable to hold back the 4 individuals who had the same rank as him. Because he was too busy fighting against them, 13 was able to hit his back with several arrows, greatly weakening his ability to fight. Soon, the guard captain was finally knocked down and then dragged into the residence with the rest of his men. "Bring him inside," 13 ordered as he looked at the City Lord, whom Armand was carrying over his shoulders like a sack of rice. "Norris, I'll leave the rest to you." The black-robed man, who had stayed on the roof with Zion, chuckled as he looked at the unconscious old man, whose glasses had already fallen on the ground. This was his first time turning a high-profile tigerkin into a slave. To be honest, he even pitied Paven, knowing that the moment the City Lord regained his senses, he would be serving a new master, who would soon take over the old man's connections and become the new king of the Underworld in the Sumatran kingdom. A few years ago, I thought I had reached the pinnacle of my ideal life. I might not be the king of the Sumatran kingdom, who reigned over all tigerkins, but I still held power that only fell behind him. I prided myself as the smartest and most cunning among the nobles of our race. When the king was still a prince, I was among the nobles who supported him. With that, I even managed to push my daughter onto him, allowing her to become our kingdom's queen. With her influence, I managed to form a lot of connections. Everyone wanted to become my friend. Everyone wanted to become my ally. Everyone wanted to become my tool, hoping that in the future, I would return the favor and help them in their time of need. There was no doubt in my mind that I was the king of the Underworld. With a single word from me, the mercenaries and the assassin guilds would move. With a wave of my hand, the other nobles would stand behind me. I was fine with that kind of power. I was content with that kind of influence. But that all changed when I was approached by a person who had been tasked to visit the Valbera archipelago exactly 4 years ago. At first, I wasn't interested, but when the person showed me a mirror that allowed me to communicate with his master, it was then that I realized that everything I believed in could be destroyed in a heartbeat. The Tigerkin King and the Barbarian King had the rank of thrones. But even if they joined hands and worked together to fight the being who appeared before me, their chances of winning were non-existent. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that even if the army of the Tigerkins and the united alliance of the barbarians and orcs were to stand on the same side, we still wouldn't be able to defeat the being who had set his eyes on the Valbera archipelago. I was born with a very powerful sixth sense, allowing me to know which side was the winning side. Although I felt bad for my daughter and my king, I decided to become that being's pawn in exchange for his assurance that my people wouldn't be enslaved or mercilessly killed. That being also promised me the throne of the Sumatran kingdom, a position that I once dreamed of having. I was a very ambitious person, you see, and yet I didn't feel excited about betraying my people. However, I didn't have a choice in the matter. If I declined the offer, that being would choose another person, and the end result would be the same. Since that was the case, why couldn't it be me instead? A verbal promise was forged between us. A verbal promise which held no power, but what choice did I have? An insect that could easily be crushed didn't have the power to negotiate better terms. All I could do was wish that the one who desired to make the Valbera archipelago part of his conquest would honor their word. When I asked my new master if he had also sent a messenger to the side of the barbarians, he laughed and praised me for being smart. But the praise he gave me chilled my heart to the core because it meant that someone else had been chosen to commit the same betrayal toward the barbarian race. Although they were our rivals and enemies, the Tigerkins had come to respect their strength. We were a race who worshipped the strong, and toward the race who managed to defeat us in battle. We admired them as much as we hated them. Even if I wasn't good at fighting because I specialized in office work, I, for one, wanted to face them on the battlefield and fight a glorious battle. It didn't matter what the result would be. I would have accepted the result as long as the battle was done with honor and dignity. But there was no dignity to be had in the upcoming war. We were merely puppets who would wage a war against each other for the sake of that being's entertainment. We were only actors in a play who would perform according to his whim. If he wished for the Tigerkins to win, we would win. If he wished for the Tigerkins to lose, we would lose. For this reason and this reason alone, I dedicated my life to becoming a loyal subordinate, with the hope that he would spare my people from such a fate. If there was one race who should survive, I prayed fervently that it would be my race. With determination in my heart, I went above and beyond my means and used everything in my power to push the war to completion. My daughter never forgot to listen to my words and constantly whispered in her husband's ear that this war was something that must be fought and won by the Tigerkins. Everything was going smoothly. We already had the necessary means for victory. But all that hard work vanished under the blazing flames that raged during the night of the Harvest Festival. All my hard work, all my sacrifices, burned until only ashes remained. As I opened my eyes, I found myself in the darkness, bound by shackles. The anger I felt several hours ago was replaced by heartache and loss because I had failed to protect my race. I had failed to protect my people. It was highly possible that news of what happened would reach my master, and he would be disappointed with me. Now that the Tigerkins were vulnerable, my counterpart in the Barbarian Kingdom would surely make his move to ensure his people's victory. I knew this to be true, for I was the same. If the one whom my master chose from the barbarians also loved his people, then he wouldn't spare us any mercy now that we had fallen to our knees. While my tears fell like rain and my anguished voice echoed within the walls of the prison I was in, I suddenly realized that I wasn't alone. I could feel someone looking at me, which made me raise my head. Through my blur vision, I saw them. A pair of green eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. The prison was dark, but this wasn't a problem for the Tigerkins because we had dark vision. However, I couldn't see properly, so I forcefully blinked my eyes to push the tears away, allowing me to see clearly. When I was finally able to gaze upon the owner of those glowing green eyes, my body subconsciously shuddered when I realized that it didn't belong to some wild animal that had been placed in prison to watch over me. No, they came from a little human boy, whom I believed to be no older than 8 years old. Human eyes didn't glow in the dark. It was impossible for it to happen. And yet, the boy seated in front of me, whose chin was resting over his intertwined hands while looking straight at me, made my heart tremble. Under his gaze, I felt vulnerable. Under that stare, I felt that he was able to see through everything that I had done and more. Suddenly, the world around us disappeared. Both of us were trapped in a truly dark place. A place where not even my dark vision could penetrate. And yet, I could still see them. That pair of glowing green eyes, which seemed to have fought countless battles. Those eyes that had seen their share of misery, hardships, and heartaches. Those eyes that looked like they held all the knowledge in the world suddenly grew in size until I felt like I was being looked down upon by a creature that didn't belong to this world. In the face of those eyes, then being, whom I served suddenly felt like a harmless creature that would easily be crushed if the owner of these eyes were to step on them like the insect that they were. I was certain that I wasn't looking at a god, for I couldn't sense any divinity in his gaze. But this person was bigger than life, and I wouldn't be surprised if he had fought against a god before due to how powerful his gaze was. Under that powerful gaze, my vision started to blur as tears returned to my eyes. For some reason, I didn't feel sadness or desperation. My tears were filled with relief, knowing that there might be a chance to turn everything around. With this human boy aiding us, there might be a chance for survival. I, who trusted my instincts my whole life, knew then and there that this child would use me as a pawn. He would treat me like a tool. He would work me as a slave. And yet, I didn't feel afraid. If it was him, I was willing to kneel and offer my services with all of my heart. For he alone could contend against that being, whom even the Tigerkin King and the Barbarian King couldn't hope to defeat. Please save us, I pleaded through tears. Please save us, I beg of you. I broke down and cried in front of the human boy, who continued to watch me with those calm green eyes, which were still visible through my blurred vision. I'll do anything. I'll give you everything that I have. So please save us. I, the second most influential person in the Sumatran kingdom, begged a human boy whom I could easily kill with a flick of my finger to save our race and kingdom. I threw away my pride and dignity to ask for help, for I knew that this was our chance. Our only chance for survival. As my cries echoed within the prison walls, a calm, yet unyielding voice reached my ears. Paven Murdosk, raise your head. I hurriedly obeyed and looked at the 7-year-old, who was now standing in front of me. Originally, I planned to make you my slave, but I changed my mind. The boy then crouched down, bringing his face close to mine, allowing me to see his face. Paven Murdosk, I have heard your pleas. The human boy then crouched down and rested his right hand over my shoulder. Do you wish for me to save you? Not me, I replied. Save my people. A chuckle escaped the boy's lips, and not long after, I felt the chains that bound me to the wall suddenly break apart, freeing me. Very well, the human boy nodded. But, in return, you will give everything to me. Your life, your honor, your dignity, and your loyalty. Surrender them all to me. They're yours, I declared, wrapping my hands around his frail body, which I could easily crush if I wished for it. I, Paven Murdosk, am yours to command. In that dark prison, where I felt that all hope had been lost, I found someone who made me feel young again. Someone who reignited the courage that had disappeared after a life of comfort and leisure. Someone who lit the flame of a tigerkin in my heart. Someone who would take my hand and lead me down a path I didn't know existed. Stop crying, old man, the human boy said before lightly tapping my shoulder, signaling me to let him go from my clutch. Wipe your tears. We have work to do. I obeyed and wiped the tears from my eyes. When I was done, I looked at the child who would carry our fates on his very small shoulders. But I knew that he could carry them, for my instincts were telling me so. My name is Zion Leventis. Welcome to the winning team, Paven Murdosk, 13 said and crossed his arms over his chest. I know this is a bit sudden, but there is something that I need from you. What is it, Zion? Paven asked. Even if I don't have it, I will get it for you no matter the price. Good. Since that is how you feel, I will not hold back. A faint smile appeared on 13's face as he looked at the king of the underworld of the Sumatran kingdom. Do you perhaps have a 5-leaf clover? Paven chuckled before roaring out in laughter. The boy in front of me could have asked me for anything, and yet he only asked me for a 5-leaf clover, which numbered in the dozens in my personal collection. Inside one of the luxurious guest rooms in the city lord's residence, 13 sat on the bed while twirling a 5-leaf clover in his hands. He was looking at the space in front of him and checking the information on his status screen. Unique quest. Quest category, chain quest. Quest name, the 13 trials. First trial, completed. Escape the Houdini Desert. Second trial completed. Find a 5-leaf clover. No, well, not bad. You remind me of myself when I was your age. But you still have a long way to go if you want to come home. 13 rolled his eyes after seeing the message from his old man after he completed his second trial. Now that his second mission was over, it was now time for him to see what the old fart had prepared for him next. Third trial. Make the purple-furred honey badger your ally. 13 snorted after reading his third trial. If he received this quest a week ago, then he would have cursed the system god for giving him another unreasonable quest. But it just so happened that this quest aligned with what 13 had planned to do. The city lord had come clean and told him everything he knew. Of course, 13 already knew whom he was dealing with, but Paven made sure to report everything he had done for that being over the past few years. This included the handful of exchanges he had with his counterpart in the barbarian lands, saving 13 the trouble of needing to uncover the barbarian's identity. Also, 13 had chosen his battlefield. The fight would be waged on the Warzur Plains, and what better ally to have than the purple-furred honey badger, who is currently in a territorial war with the diabolical hyena, which was slightly stronger than it. 13 wanted to eliminate the rank 6 overlord, who now lorded over the furthest grasslands. He understood that the diabolical hyena would order his subordinates to increase their numbers so that they would become the strongest force in the Warzur Plains. Once that happened, it would then actively hunt the purple-furred honey badger and raise its rank to a pseudo-rank 7 overlord, which could only be defeated by dozens of champions working together. The boy was certain that the third party would use the diabolical hyena as his lackey, further boosting his army. 13 would not allow such a thing to come to pass, so he would definitely get rid of the djinn before it joined hands with his enemy. For that to happen, he would need the cooperation of the purple-furred honey badger, who was still recovering from its injuries. While he was thinking of the best approach to handle the situation, someone knocked in his room, breaking his concentration. But 13 didn't mind. There were only a handful of people who might come looking for him at this point in time, and all of them were his allies. "Come in," 13 said. A moment later, the door opened, and Paven walked inside the room alongside Rafiki. "I have done as you ask of me," Paven reported. "But I can't believe that you targeted 2 other cities. You are very ruthless, Zion. Thank you for the praise." 13 smirked. "When will they arrive?" 3 days from now," Paven answered. "Some of them will be coming from the capital, so it will take a while for them to arrive. Also, I discovered something else that happened in Dun City." "And that is?" 13 asked. "Brigham is missing," Paven replied. "According to my spy, this happened while the granary and garrison in Dun City were burning. Rumors are circulating that the barbarians have kidnapped him and used the commotion to escape the city." 13 frowned after hearing the news. He had assigned Anwar to implement the operation in Dun City, and he had told the Tigerkin that he shouldn't touch Brigham at this point in time because he didn't have enough manpower to succeed in capturing him. His third-rate villain only had 4 assassins accompanying him. One of them was a champion, and the remaining 3 were grandmasters. It was an elite unit that could easily accomplish their mission, but they were not strong enough to face the city lord in a confrontation. Could it be? 13 entertained the idea of Anwer taking a gamble to kidnap Brigham as they fled the city after finishing their mission. It was a very big gamble, and one mistake could cost them their lives. This was something not for the faint of heart, and only crazy people would attempt such a thing. Do you have any leads as to where Brigham might have hidden or where he could have been taken? 13 inquired. Paven shook his head. He fancied himself as the puppeteer behind a radical faction, but he was also a decent fighter. It would not be easy to capture him unless someone laid out a meticulous trap for him. Zion, I don't know if your people in Dun City succeeded or not, but if they did, this incident will not die down anytime soon, especially since the 3 main granaries of the kingdom were compromised. The only saving grace was that people didn't think too highly of Brigham, since only the inner circle of the radical faction knew of his machinations. 13 nodded his head in understanding. Is there anything else that I should know? Yes. The whole nation is in an uproar, and as we speak, messenger birds are flying to every city in the Sumatran kingdom, informing them of the events that transpired several hours ago. I believe that the king is already aware of the things that happened here, Dun City and Rosina City. It is only a matter of time before he personally sends his retinue to assess the damages that we received during this attack. Fortunately, you had the foresight to also attack a member of the conservative faction. If not, things might have escalated into a civil war between 2 factions. 13 smiled faintly after hearing the relief in Paven's voice. For now, act like you usually do and maintain contact with you-know-who, 13 ordered. I will be leaving the city after I've talked to your subordinates and head back to the barbarian lands. I need to ensure that your counterpart is also brought down a peg and see to it that the barbarians will not attack anytime soon either. Paven nodded his head in understanding. Zion, I will be returning to the general's residence to tell him everything that has happened, Rafiki stated. Is there something that you wish to pass on to him? Yes, 13 replied. Tell him that I will still be borrowing Dixon and his scouting party for a while. We will go to the barbarian lands in a few days to do an undercover mission. Also, no matter what happens, he should stick to the plan and not contact Paven in order to avoid suspicions. The corner of Rafiki's lips curled up into a smirk. Are you sure you don't want me to keep the fact that you turned a few Tigerkins into your slaves a secret? Even if I didn't tell you, you would still keep it a secret from him, right? 13 answered with a smirk of his own. The boy and the shaman stared at each other for half a minute before chuckling at the same time. Zion, you should consider accepting Briella's offer to become her adoptive son, Rafiki stated. I don't want you as my enemy. Even if I don't accept her offer, I will still not be your enemy, Rafiki. Rest assured, I am on your side, and I wish for it to stay that way. After all, killing you will be a shame. The shaman winked at the 7-year-old before leaving the room. Although he hadn't turned Paven into a slave in the end, all of the city lord's personal guards and servants had been enslaved by Norris, and their ownership had been handed over to Zion. This was to ensure that none of them would be able to jeopardize his plans. He had no intention of leaving any witnesses inside Parnia City. No, he planned to take them all back to the barbarian lands and make them part of his armed forces. 13 was certain that General Stark wouldn't like the idea of Tigerkins becoming his slaves, so for his peace of mind, he truly hoped that Rafiki would keep his lips shut tight. But even if the shaman told the general, the 7-year-old would just casually shrug because whatever the general thought or did afterward was no longer his concern. The only people who knew the identity of the third party were him and Paven, and he wanted to keep it that way. The fewer people who knew about this secret, the safer they would be. After Paven left the room, 13 called out to Visago and ordered him to find Anwer to confirm their situation. He didn't know if his sworn brother had succeeded in a showdown with Brigham, but if he really did, then that meant that Anwer was more capable than he originally gave him credit for. Somewhere in the Sumatran kingdom, Anwer looked at the campfire with a solemn expression on his face. Not only did he succeed in completing his mission, he even managed to capture Brigham, whom 13 had labeled as the ringleader of the radical faction. What he accomplished was something that Zion never imagined to be possible, but he still managed to pull it off using his cunning and intelligence. There were many soldiers who respected his father, as well as his adoptive father, General Stark, within Dun City. He reached out to the people whom he believed were extremely loyal to General Stark and served under him in the past. Although they had retired from military service, their loyalty to him didn't decrease with time. Anwer had met these people many times in the past, and his father told him how loyal they were to the general. In fact, these people were the survivors of the team that were led by Anwer's father, who had died in action after they were ambushed by the barbarians. The general compensated them greatly, and, even to this day, they still received a monthly stipend from him, allowing them to live their life of retirement in peace and comfort. The money that the general was giving them came from his own purse, which Anwer discovered by accident in the past. After knowing that Brigham had dared to harm their general, these people didn't hesitate to jump onto Anwer's bandwagon and help him conduct his operation. Since they decided to become part of his team, he divulged the reason why he was doing this. When they found out that Brigham not only tried to harm the general, but also betrayed their kingdom, none of them hesitated to burn the granaries and barracks while Anwer and his assassins moved in to capture Brigham. The young Tigerkin's forces, when he entered Dun City, only numbered 4 people. But now he had over 50 veteran warriors under his command, who were all willing to follow him and listen to his orders. While he was deep in thought, a Poco landed beside the log that he was sitting on. Anwer immediately recognized him as Visego, who always stayed by his sworn brother's side. "Did you really capture Brigham?" Visego asked using 13's voice, which elicited a smile on Anwer's face. "I did," Anwer replied. "You're amazing," Visego praised. "After my master heard that Brigham was missing, he immediately thought that you had managed to capture him." The smile on Anwer's face widened after hearing the Poco's praise. "Did he send you to find me?" Visego nodded. "Yes. He wants you to head straight to Pangea City as fast as you can." "Pangea City?" Arwen frowned. "Did something happen? Did he not complete his mission?" "He did," Visego commented. "Then why?" "Because he managed to make Pavan Murdosk his loyal subordinate." "What?" Arwen's surprise cry alerted the watchers, who were paying close attention to the dumb-looking bird that landed beside their young master. They were surprised when the bird started talking. But when they realized that their master was familiar with the bird, they decided to just listen to the conversation. "Tell me everything that happened," Anwer stated. "How did he manage to subjugate the city lord?" Visego glanced at his surroundings before giving Anwer the "we need to talk in private" gaze. The Tigerkin nodded and raised his arm, allowing Visego to perch onto it. A moment later, he walked a distance away from their camp, out of the earshot of his subordinates. Once he was certain that no one was eavesdropping, Visego told Anwer everything. When the bird finished his tale, Anwer couldn't help but feel his blood boil, not out of anger, but excitement. He thought that what he had accomplished was already exceptional, but compared to what Zion had done, the latter was even a step ahead of him. "Understood. Tell him that we will head to Pangea City at first light," Anwer stated. "At most it will take us a day to reach it. But are you sure that Pavan should remain free and not be made a slave? What if he changed his mind?" "I don't really know the details, but Master assured me that it is going to be fine," Visego replied. "Aside from the city lord, everyone in the residence has already been enslaved by Norris, and their ownership transferred to Master. Pangea City is now under his complete control." A sigh escaped Anwer's lips, because this was truly a feat that not everyone could pull off. The most he could do was capture Brigham. Taking over an entire city never occurred to him, so he was truly impressed by his sworn brother's achievement. "You may go now," Anwer nodded. "Tell him that I'll be there as fast as I can." "Understood." Visego spread his wings wide and took off towards the sky. He was lucky that he found Anwer right away and was able to pass his master's message to him. The Tigerkin watched as the Poco disappeared in the darkness before he returned to his camp. His original plan was to head back to Karabayr City and present Brigham to his father, but he deemed that it would be better if he went to Parnia City to reunite with Zion. The next day, "It's a shame that I can't see Tiona's personal information," 13 thought as he stared at his status page. He had tried clicking Tiona's name, but nothing happened, making him sigh for the umpteenth time. The 7-year-old was currently seated on the head of the Rocky Balboa, who had dug its way out of the underground cavern and surfaced in the city lord's backyard. Similar to Tiona, the giant snake, whom 13 had christened as Rocky, could travel underground as if it was swimming in water. The path that it took closed behind it, returning the soil to its natural state. While waiting for Anwar's arrival, 13 wanted to know if all snakes would listen to Tiona's command and become her subordinate. But after discussing this with Tiona, the black snake shook her head and told her master that she could only command one snake at a time. However, she insisted that once she grew a bit older, the number of subordinates she could have would also increase, which made 13 very happy. Also, there was a limit to the rank that would follow Tiona's orders. Her ability extended up to rank 5 monsters that belonged to the snake family. While it was still possible to have a friendly relationship with rank 6 snakes, it would be extremely difficult to make one of them her subordinate. Actually, the Domini Mortis were the favorite food of snakes, who were rank 7 and above. These were the snakes that the Domini Mortis couldn't influence, because their rank was simply too high for them to be dominated. "Too bad. You're not as strong as the person who I named you after," 13 said while rubbing the chin of the black snake, who was enjoying her master's attention. "If you had the snake charmer ability, we would have been able to raise a snake army that could move unhindered across the land." Tiona, who heard her master's words, hissed repeatedly, telling him that she could do that if she became 100 years old. 13 could only laugh after hearing the little snake's declaration because he found her cute. Rocky, who was being used as a chair, couldn't help but sigh in its heart. It had sworn its allegiance to Tiona. But since its master had a master, Rocky was also forced to obey the human boy's orders, despite not wanting to. "Don't worry, Rocky." 13 lightly patted the Rocky snake's head. "I'll introduce you to Christopher, Rihanna, and Giga Chad. I'm sure they will be happy to have you as our ally." Rocky pretended that it didn't hear the human's words and remained unmoved from its position. Sensing that his newest subordinate was feeling rebellious, 13 decided to let it do what it wanted. "I wonder what Christopher and the others are doing," 13 thought as he looked to the south. Parnia City was situated at a high elevation, so he was able to see the boundary of the sea from the horizon. He was thinking of sending Visago and Polka to Groner City, so that Polka would know where to go next time he ordered her to send a message to Christopher. His plan was to let Anwar and Pavan collaborate with each other and handle the war preparations for the Sumatran kingdom. As for Brigham, 13 planned to enslave him and make the city lord become Anwar's subordinate. Since his sworn brother had proven himself to be capable, he would be more at ease to let him handle the affairs of the Sumatran kingdom, especially the forces of the Underworld. The mercenaries, assassins, information brokers, thieves, and Pavan's other connections would fall under Anwar's capable hands, allowing his third-rate villain to grow in power. "This will become part of his training," 13 mused. "I hope that after I'm done dealing with Pavan's counterpart in the Barbarian lands, he will consolidate his power here, so that he can assist me whenever I need it." 13 would need manpower to deal with the purple-furred honey badger and the diabolic hyena. Both of them would require over a dozen champions to safely subjugate, preventing any casualties from arising. Since 13 had the ability to talk to monsters, he was confident that he would be able to convince the purple-furred honey badger to become his ally. However, that didn't mean that the rank 6 overlord would just listen to him. No, he needed to prove that he was strong enough to gain its acknowledgement. A strong monster wouldn't just bow its head to someone weaker than it. An alliance would be easily formed between two parties of equal standing. So, before he could go to find the rank 6 overlords, he first needed to return to Groner City and gather forces for a monster hunt. This is getting exciting. 13 couldn't help but smile, because it had been a while since he felt this immense pressure of fighting against a very strong opponent. This was the feeling that his hosts had felt when they were being targeted by big organizations or powerful people who wished to use them as stepping stones. During those times, 13 had helped his hosts escape and think of a way to overcome their current situation. Facing something similar, the 7-year-old couldn't help but chuckle because it reminded him of old times. He was someone who had fought against a god, so although the being who had set his eyes on the Valbera continent was extremely powerful, he didn't feel that the situation was hopeless. I just need to get the beacon of hope. 13 smirked, and I think I already know where to find it. Yes, 13 finally had a clue as to where he could find the beacon of hope, and with this information in hand, he was one step closer to creating a plan, which would make the Laplace demon and the One truly understand the ability of the black sheep who belong to the system god's family.